13.
O'clock.
Hey everybody, what's going on?
Oh man, look, I forgot the lights.
You forgot to turn the lights on.
Yeah.
He's over there in the dark.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember like which ones you put on and which ones you didn't because I don't fuck with them. So
That should
'cause
be
I
it
just
right
got
there.
home. That seems good. That seems good.
Yeah, that should be right. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
It took a second for it to adjust.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
what it does.
Okay.
That looks a lot better actually.
Yeah.
I thought it was a little dark in here.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. So hey, as you can probably hear, Tom is a little sick.
Yeah, I got a damn cold. My fucking head's all stuffed up.
He's been sleeping all day
Slept
today.
all day.
I have a little bit of a cold too, but I had to go to work. So
Yeah, and I got a damn snot rag and shit, so you just hear me fucking blow my fucking brains out. And yeah.
So sure, everybody. You can say it's like werewolf noises.
Yeah.
That's what you say.
I'm on all kinds of medicine. It's not helping. Hopefully this booze will help.
Booze usually helps
Just
me,
vodka.
honestly,
Yeah.
more than cold medicine. I don't
Yeah.
get colds a lot. Like I have one, and I feel kind of crappy, but not that bad.
Man, I
But
slept all fucking day.
I know I was kind of getting worried about you because he doesn't usually like go all day without messaging me, and I'm like, man, he's either asleep or he's dead.
Sleeping. What was funny is I woke up at like 4 o'clock in the morning last night, and I thought I was awake, and I rolled over, and you weren't in bed. And like two hours had passed, you'd already gone to work. I
Yeah.
didn't hear you get up or anything. I
Yeah.
must have fallen back to sleep.
I got up a little before.
But I thought I was
bit
awake.
before 5,
Yeah.
like usual. I did get up at like 1 or 2 to go to the bathroom, which I usually do.
Yeah,
And I thought I heard Dakota like being like, "Meow,
yeah,
where is everybody?"
yeah.
It was that kind of thing.
She's racing up and down the stairs now. That's her new thing.
Yeah, and the 2 kitties, they're still kind of unsure about. They're not beating each other up or anything, but they'll kind of come and like look at each other like, "What's your deal? What's your
They're
deal?"
gonna start getting along.
I think they will.
Yeah.
Esther said, "Jenny, you look great. Thank you very much." Slasher Fred said, "This sure is a first time you're talking about lores about supernatural creatures. I mean, usually you talk about true stories."
Yeah.
No,
we've done it before.
we've done we did a cryptid show, but that was
Yeah.
like a long time ago.
We talked about sea monsters and everything.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's right. That was really old. Yeah, we did like a sea monster show.
Yeah.
And the thing about it is that we've done like vampire adjacent topics. Like we did a show about Vlad the Impaler. We did a show about Elizabeth Bathory. We did a show about Mercy Brown, who was a real person that they thought was a vampire. Because we'll get into that a little bit. So I might not bring that stuff up as much because we've already done shows about that. And the thing about it is that Vlad the Impaler, even though he comes up a lot like on vampire topics, he really only comes up because of him like sort of being based on, or Dracula sort of being based on him. So it's like nobody thought that Vlad the Impaler was a vampire
He was a blood drinker, though.
in his lifetime. Nobody called him that.
Well, the propaganda of the time said he was drinking blood.
Yeah, but he was doing a bunch of other shit too.
Yeah,
They just thought he
from
was
impaling
like
people.
fucking.
But he's a hero, Romanian hero.
Well, yeah, and I was just like watching a documentary earlier that said that, and I might have mentioned this on the Vlad the Impaler show, is that in Romania they actually wouldn't allow Dracula to be published for like a very, very long time because it pissed him off a little bit.
Yeah, because he was defending Romania from like the Turkish Empire.
Mm-hmm.
It was during the time when the Ottoman Turks were trying to invade and everything, and he lived in a place. He basically was in charge of a little kingdom called Wallachia. That's what it was called back then. Nowadays it's Transylvania, but it's not quite the same borders. And the church, he fought for the church. The church told him to keep the Islamic invasion out. And
he
a lot
did
of stuff
so
that
with
happened.
extreme
Hostages
prejudice.
got taken out back and forth between the neighboring families. Boyars, who were some kind of Saxon merchants, were fucking with him because I think they wanted to align with the Turks actually. And he used basically a campaign of terror to unify Wallachia and to get foreigners out. And part of the things he would do is impale people, which is impalement's a fantastic punishment. It takes a long time, and it leaves a monument makes your victim into a monument, and other attackers come and see it and go, damn,
That's fucked up.
Yeah, who could this? This is a bad dude. And it's terror and horror campaigns they work. Just ask the Mexican mafia. You know, fucking, their court systems, their judges are terrified of them because they'll come after you and your kids and everything. And they just infiltrate into your systems. You can't get away from them. So they're, you know. But that's what Vlad was all about. He was using mafia horror techniques. They work though.
Juan says, "Hello, Tom and Jenny. How are you? We're good. Though Tom is kind of sick. I'm slightly sick, but I never get as sick as he does because my immune system is almost impenetrable, at least so far."
She doesn't respond to anything. She didn't even respond to medicine hardly.
No. Well, in a way, that's kind of a blessing and a curse because it's like sometimes if I actually do get kind of sick and I take medicine, it doesn't do jack shit.
Yeah.
So you just have to kind of ride it out.
It's a real thing. It's called a weak responder.
But luckily, I don't usually
or a
get
non-responder.
I can go years and years without getting a cold.
She's what they call in the gym business a weak responder.
Which sounds negative when you put it like that.
There's a weak response to everything you do.
Yeah.
You don't get sick. You get sick, it's a weak response. Give them medicine, it's a weak response.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, you know, I'll take it. It's, you know, I'd rather have that than, like, just get sick at the drop of a hat. That's for sure.
Yeah.
One said the setup looks cool. Okay, so they must not have been here. No, it's not like a while. I think we've had it for like a week, right?
Yeah.
Didn't we rearrange it like last weekend?
Yeah.
No, not last weekend. The weekend
before.
before.
I wanted to do it like this for a long time. Jenny wasn't having it. We eventually got around to doing it.
Well, because I knew it was going to be a pain in the ass.
It was easy.
It wasn't really. It was kind of a pain in the ass. But yeah. Well, I was to say it was gonna be a pain in the ass because initially you said that we had to move this desk too, and I was like, oh no, I don't want to fucking do that because then I have to take all his books down and all that other kind of crap. That's what I was thinking.
No, I just meant moving that desk over here.
Okay. Well, yeah, but before you said we had to move all of it, and I was just like, I don't want to do that. John Robertson said, "Hey guys, I watched Dracula 2020 TV series, and the third episode is in the modern day. Dracula loves modern day stuff, and Tom's ideas of Dracula in the modern day is pretty much that episode." I think we watched that. Was that the one that was like, wasn't it like a mini series, like 3 episodes? I want to say it was a while back that we saw it, but yeah, like the first 2 were in. Yeah, but then like the third one was in the present. I remember kind of liking it.
I don't remember what my ideas were either
about Dracula in the modern day.
Right.
Well, yeah.
No, I just knew that Dracula would be into technology. Yeah. He would like the modern world.
Yeah, well, I guess I don't know, like, I guess more the movie character than the book character, maybe. Although, maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe the book character would
Dracula
be
would
kind
be into the internet, man. He'd like internet porn. He'd like all kinds of shit.
Are you sure you're not saying that because you like internet porn?
No, he'd just be into that shit. Because it's high tech.
Right.
But he'd want to have his own version of it.
Right.
There'd be like fucking cam-to-cam blood drinking and shit.
You know, I'm sure that there's niches for that.
Yeah.
Because there is a whole little vampire subculture, which...
Yeah, they'd be doing that.
Can get a little weird, to be honest with you. Some people like take it entirely too seriously. Oh, and that's another thing too, is that we've also done shows about quote unquote vampire killers like Richard Chase and that other motherfucker from Eustace, from here actually.
Yeah. Will Ferrell.
No, Rod Ferrell.
Rod Ferrell. Yeah.
Will Ferrell is the guy that was
an
elf.
Right. Rod Ferrell. Yeah, I worked for his initial attorney. I saw his case file when he first got arrested. I ended up filing it when I was doing law clerk work for her. But she passed him on to another one, so she didn't have him for very long. But, yeah, Farrell.
I had forgotten all about... He's not from here originally, he moved here later, but I had forgotten that he did live here in Eustace, where we live right now. Because I was listening to something about him the other day, and I was just like, oh yeah, that's right.
Just a real fantasy-prone goth kid.
Yeah, and like I said, there are like it's a small minority. You don't see as much. I feel like the big heyday of that was like the 90s when Vampire the Masquerade came out. Yeah. Like everybody was going around calling themselves like all these fancy
vampire names.
Names.
It was LARPing.
What was his? He was Visago, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Visago.
Yeah, which that sounds like a Yamaha motorcycle.
It does kind of.
I got a 750 Visago. Oh yeah.
Either that or it sounds like an exotic spice. You know what I mean? That's in like Malaysian cuisine or something. I don't know, but it doesn't sound like a vampire name. No. Yeah, John says Dracula upgraded his fashion. He used a phone and iPad, and he thought a dump of a house was a palace, and he absolutely loved it. Yeah. I remember. We did watch that.
I don't remember that one.
We could probably rewatch it. I think it was only 3 episodes.
Okay.
Like it was a mini-series type of thing.
I don't remember it.
I remember liking it. We might have reviewed it, too, now that I'm thinking about it.
He had a dump of a house. He thought it was a castle.
Well, he thought it was, like, super cool because, like, obviously all the modern conveniences would be,
yeah.
like, a big deal, you know what I
Right,
mean?
yeah.
Because he's like, oh, it's like... Well, like I said, it's if you took, like, a medieval peasant
Yeah.
and brought them to, like,
Yeah.
a trailer park nowadays, they'd probably think it was the most miraculous thing
Yeah.
ever. Mark says, anybody remember when Leslie Nielsen played Dracula? He
Yeah.
was... Didn't he do Dracula Dead and Loving It?
It's called Love Bites, or was it?
No. That was Love at First Bite.
Love at First
That
Bite,
was
yeah.
George Hamilton.
Okay, yeah.
I remember that one too. I remember really liking that movie, but I bet it didn't age very well. No, Leslie Nielsen, I'm pretty sure was in Dracula Dead and Loving It, which was also comedy. That wasn't Mel Brooks, was it?
I don't know.
I can't remember if it was Mel Brooks or not. But yeah, so like I said, this will probably be just talk about vampire lore, vampire movies, whatever you and werewolf stuff too. Like whatever you guys like feel like wanted to talk about. I watched like a bunch of different stuff, and there's so much stuff that it's like hard to distill it down into one thing. So this might be kind of all over the place, but you know what I mean. Yes, it was Mel Brooks. Okay, so my memory is like a lot better than I thought it was. Slash Fred said, if you ever see Son of Dracula with Lon Chaney Jr., his character name is Alucard. Yeah, I kind of feel like they started doing that a lot, like in the vampires. They're like, we're going to be super sneaky. It's not a Dracula movie, it's Alucard, even though, you know, obviously that's like Dracula spelled backwards. I think they did that in some of the Hammer films, too, now that I'm thinking about it. But, yeah, well then think about the vampire movies. Well, as far as, like, vampire lore goes, are you breathing over there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I can't breathe.
Okay, it's like I heard that noise and I was like, what is that? But the thing about vampire lore is that a lot of the vampire lore that people know nowadays is actually quite recent. And a lot of it comes from Dracula, from the novel. From 1897, or from like some shit before that, because Dracula wasn't the first vampire thing. There was also there was one just called The Vampire, which was written by John Polidori. Even though when it came out, it was actually attributed to Lord Byron, but it was actually his personal physician, Dr. John Polidori, who wrote it. And the character of Lord Ruthven in The Vampire with a Y is thought to be the first aristocratic vampire, and it was because Polidori based it on Lord Byron, based the character on Lord Byron. Prior to that, I mean, as far as I'm aware, that was the first large-scale fictional story that had like a cultural impact, that had a vampire that was an aristocrat. You know what I mean? So Dracula wasn't the first one to do that. I think the vampire was the first to do that. And because prior to that, like I said, the vampire had just been like a monster. It was just essentially like a ghoul.
Yeah.
Like not quite like a zombie, but kinda. And vampires were actually considered like gross. Pretty gross. They don't look anything like what we would conceive of as a vampire nowadays. I did like that Anne Rice, which I can't remember what book it was, but where she... Wasn't it when Lestat was like looking for these other vampires, and he found those ones that just like lived in the cemeteries and were all like gross and nasty and...
To the French cemetery?
Yeah.
They weren't gross and nasty. They were regular. They looked like regular people. In Vampire Lestat, when he was young, this is still back like I guess like in the 1600s, he found a vampire walking through the forest that was like a wild animal, more like a living corpse. He destroyed it, from what I remember. And he didn't know what it was. Never saw another one.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But that kind of, to me, is like what I conceive of when you talk about like folkloric vampires.
Yeah. So I think he destroyed it. Some of you Lestat fans probably would, but from what I read, and he just mentions it very briefly. That when he was looking for other vampires, when he was in his fortress, he heard it thinking. He heard its thoughts from a long distance away, and he flew out there, or ran out there. I don't remember. I think he could fly by that point, couldn't he? But he went down there and saw what it was, and he just said it was a vampire that was like a living corpse. It was just horrid. So and I think he destroyed it. He said it was mindless.
Yeah, and for probably hundreds or thousands of years, that was actually the folkloric vampire. Yeah. That's what people were talking about when they talked about vampires. Yeah. They weren't talking about like some suave motherfucker with fangs and all that kind of stuff.
They're talking about a ghoul.
Yeah, essentially.
Or a zombie.
Yeah, it was almost more like a zombie, really. Yeah. And the thing about it was that they didn't look anything like... Because I kind of feel like nowadays people have a perception of vampires being, like, really gaunt and pale and, you know, like I said, kind of suave and everything like that. But, like, back in the day, vampires looked more like bloated corpses. Yeah. Because they were supposedly, like, engorged with blood. So almost like a tick. Because that's what they did. They went around and, like, fed on people. So they looked all... So their skin looked all dark, like it was decomposed, kind of like purple.
That's because they were digging people up, suspected they were vampires. When you dig up a body, they're bloated.
Yeah, and well, and that's what... And I think a lot of the scholarship around where a lot of these legends came from... And I think kind of the overarching idea is that, well, you know, back in the day, people didn't really understand bodily composition, like decomposition, all that well. So it's like if they happen to, and it would happen where it's like a small village, it's like a bunch of people suddenly died of some disease and they didn't know what it was. And so they would immediately suspect, oh, well, that person that recently died is getting up out of their graves and they're killing everybody, like in this one family. Because usually vampirism, it was usually like a relative. Like the relative would get up and like come back and eat their family first and then move on to like the rest of the townsfolk. So they would be like, well, that, you know, Jim, the guy that just died, he's a vampire, so we need to go check that shit out. So then they would go and dig him up. And because they didn't see, I guess, a lot of dead bodies in that particular context, if you opened the coffin and the body was all bloated from, you know, gases and stuff like that, and sometimes, like, you know, the lungs will push blood out of the mouth, so sometimes it had, like, they had blood all over their face, shit like that, and they would think, oh, well, this is obviously the problem, and then they would drive a stake through their heart or whatever, or cut their head off.
I remember when I was a kid, I'd read books about this kind of stuff, and they would have, like, excerpts from witnesses of the times when they dig it up. They would say, well, this has to be a vampire because this person was buried 18 months ago, and look how fresh they are.
Yeah.
But they didn't know about decomposition. They had no idea what refrigeration was like.
Yeah.
They were in places in Europe where they buried pretty deep, and there were places where, you know, the ground never really got that warm. So it might have been, you know, 40 degrees, 50 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer, you know, and fucking sub-zero. It might have been frozen during the winter.
Yeah.
So, you know, yeah, it could 18 months, it'd still be together. It'd be rotten, but you'd still see, it wouldn't be bones though. You know, that's what
it would still look like
it was
pretty good
fresh,
for a dead body.
For 18 months, you know, still look pretty good.
And here's something that I don't know if I ever made this exact association, but you know how there's a thing where vampires, like, you're supposed to kill them with a stake through the heart and all this other kind of shit, which it's not always stake through the heart. Sometimes it's stake through the mouth, like, depending on what part of the world you're talking about. And for some reason, like, I was like, well, that seems kind of random. And it just seems kind of random because, well, a stake through the heart will kill anybody, not just a vampire, right? But the thing about it, where they think that came from, is because they would stake corpses, they would pin them in the coffin so they couldn't get out.
Yeah, they're nailed to the coffin.
Like, so they're nailed in there. So that's kind of where the whole thing about stakes being able to kill them, because that's what they used. They sharpened sticks and were like, this motherfucker is not getting up.
They had a bunch of different
I mean?
ones. They'd bury him upside down so they would
dig
deeper
that
into
too.
the earth instead of digging up.
They did that too.
Yeah, they did all kinds of stuff.
And they would leave stuff. This is one of the funniest things. They would leave stuff, like, by the grave sometimes, like sickles or things, because apparently that was something they liked, or that would keep them in their graves or whatever. Sometimes they would put, like, little things of Jesus and stuff. And sometimes, and this wasn't just for vampires, this was for other supernatural creatures as well, but sometimes they would put stuff like grains of rice, that was Asia mostly, or like little millet seeds, or they would have like a net that had like thousands of knots tied in it, because for whatever reason, and I don't know what the origin of this belief is, but apparently vampires, as well as some other supernatural creatures, if they see shit like that, like just like a bunch of sand or something, they have to stop and count every single grain of it. Like I said, and I've heard that about witches too. I don't think that's universal, but I've heard it about other supernatural creatures. And I don't really know what the origin of that is, where it's like they wake up and they're just like, there's like all this sand there, and they're just like, 1, 2, 3, and then the sun comes up and they die. Oh, that's another thing too, is that, and this just goes to show how, I don't know, like how the folklore has like really changed over the years and, you know, been informed by popular culture, is that really, even in Dracula, which, you know, was, like I said, not the first vampire. You had The Vampire by John Polidori before that, and then you had Carmilla, like, after that was 1819, I want to say, 1817, somewhere around there. So it was a while, maybe it was later, maybe it's 1872. But that was like a while before Dracula. Thank you very much, Titanic Discussions. That's a very nice super chat. Hello, want to say, recently discovered your channel and really enjoy your reviews. Also, shout out to Return of the Living Dead, which debuted 38 years ago tonight. I saw the 7:30 show. Enjoy a pizza, my treat, and thanks. Thank you very much. That's very, very nice of you. Tom will be back in a minute. He's blowing his head. He has a really bad cold. And I was like, he's been sleeping all day, and I came down and I'm like, are you going to be able to do the show, or should we push it back to tomorrow, or are you going to be all right? But yeah.
What? We're talking about me behind my back?
Yeah, I'm talking about you behind your back, Tom. Yeah, he sucks. No, I would never say that. I mean, I just said it to your face, but I didn't mean it. I know you are. But yeah, we got a really nice super chat from a new fan that just discovered our show. Discovered our reviews and stuff like that.
Titanic Discussions?
Yep.
Yeah, hey, thank you, man.
Yeah, that's awesome. Said have a pizza on them. Which we just may. Or some Chinese food or something. But yeah. So the whole thing about vampires getting killed in sunlight, which actually they even did in the new movie that we just saw, that we just reviewed, Last Voyage of the Demeter. That one, like, as soon as the sun like touched the vampire, they were like, whoosh, and they just like went up in flames. That's a very recent addition. That might have been from, I think the first time that trope appeared was actually in Nosferatu, because that's not even in the book. Dracula in the book could move around in the daytime. Like, he wouldn't burn up in the sun. He wasn't as strong, like it significantly weakened his powers and shit like that, but he could walk around in the day. It was all right.
Yeah.
He wouldn't die. So I think Nosferatu from 1922 was the first one to actually have, you know, where Max Schreck was there in front of the window and like the sun comes in and he's like, oh no, and he just like fades away. But I think that was the first time that happened. Somebody brought up earlier, like, not being able to see their reflections in mirrors. I'm not sure. I think that might have been, that either came from Dracula or is not that much older than Dracula. And I think that too, if Dracula was the first time that appeared, that's probably part of folklore. Again, not just vampires, but any kind of supernatural creature, because they're considered, I think the story is that because they're considered soulless, that they don't appear in mirrors. That's what I always heard.
Like the mirror just reflects your soul.
Right. Right. But yeah, so I don't think that's
so
a super old
background, they all have souls.
Yeah, see, so everything that appears in a mirror, like,
souls,
yeah, implicitly has a soul. Yeah, see, that's a good point that you're making.
You're right.
And then that you can make the argument that animals have souls, because animals appear in mirrors also.
I believe animals have souls anyway.
Well, I don't believe anybody has souls, but I'm a big advocate of animals being not different from humans, really.
The soul, what they're talking about with the soul is they're talking about what Haveroff is calling, what Stuart Haveroff is calling the quantum consciousness. It's a field of super entangled particles. Yeah, it's what gives you qualia, the sense of being. You know, with that you know what the taste of coffee is, or you know what things feel like. If you were just computing like a computer, you wouldn't have a consciousness or any qualia. Jenny's been in that state, but it hasn't really quite clicked with her that qualia exists. When she came out of surgery and she was still under the effects of anesthesia, I talked to her for about an hour. She doesn't remember a bit of it because she wasn't conscious during that time.
Well, that's happened to me, like, when I was, like, sleeping and stuff, too. And, like I've been sleeping and, like, my grandma or something, like, woke me up. And then she said, oh, you said this, that, and the other thing. Yeah. And I don't remember any of that.
Yeah. It's because your consciousness was turned off.
Right.
Man. I feel like my head's going to blow up.
Well, oh, my God.
Yeah,
so it might go like scanners right here on this very show.
I feel all this pressure on my head's going to blow up.
Slasher Fred said, do you consider Voyage of the Demeanor to be a Dracula spin-off? It's not a spin-off. It's an adaptation of part of the book.
Yeah.
Chapter 7, to be specific. The Captain's Log.
It fits right there.
And they didn't really... I mean, they took some creative liberties, but not a lot. I mean, they did flesh it out some.
Everything's plausible.
But it's pretty faithful to... the chapter. It's not a long chapter. It's only like 3 or 4 pages. But I don't know. I really liked that movie. I know it hasn't been getting like super great reviews, like mixed reviews. Like it's getting kind of half and half. But I thought it was great.
People got bad taste.
I really, really liked it.
They got bad taste. Fuck what they say. That's a good movie.
Yeah, I really liked it. Like I said, it was cool.
I hope they tell the rest of the story, but I don't think they will.
They probably won't because it's not doing very well.
Well, they put so much money in these things. They expected to make $1 billion out of each one of them. Movies aren't what they were, you know? It's competing against a lot of other shit. Movies are becoming like... They're going to go out of style. You know, video games are better. Eventually, movies will be kind of like what we consider an epic poem. What, do you go listen to poetry readings with epic poems?
I mean, some people
might. No. Some people might, but, you know, it's not $1 billion industry. That's what movies are going to be. They're going to take AI... and all this fucking graphics imagery capabilities, and they're going to put that into a damn program, and you'll have 10-year-old boys making full-length feature films just based upon specifications they talked about with the damn AI computer. And it would probably be a fantastic movie when he's done with it.
Well, you know, AI at this point can write a novel.
Yeah.
It's not a good novel. You still need a person to look through it because it's not smart enough to do that yet. Yeah. Like especially like longer works, it kind of like starts breaking down. Eventually, it can't keep track of everything.
Eventually, that computer will be able to cast it with realistic. They look like they're real people. You can even say, "I want Humphrey Bogart to be the main character," and it'll fucking make it. It'll make him Humphrey Bogart, voice and everything. So you'll have some 10-year-old boy. I want a movie about Boba Fett. It's gonna do this and that. It's on this planet, and then he watches it and he goes, "No, it's not quite good. Change it here, here, and here." And before you know it, he's fucking made a badass movie. Hollywood won't be able to compete with that. But the thing is that the value of movies will plummet because anybody will be able to do them. You'll probably be able to see it for free, and they're just AI.
Ben said, I think when Dracula walked around during the day, he was comparatively weak. Yeah, he was. Like, his powers were notably diminished, but the sun didn't kill him. Like I said, I'm pretty sure, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that F.W. Murnau's Nosferatu was the first one that the sun, like, straight up killed him, like, as soon as it hit him. And then from then on, it seemed to. Although, I will note, I didn't really want to bring up Twilight, but we had to bring up Twilight.
I've never seen it. I heard it's good.
What, Twilight?
Yeah, I heard it's good, yeah.
No, it's awful.
Is it terrible?
The books are awful.
Okay.
The books are awful and the movies are awful. But...
They were popular, though.
Yeah, it was a teen girl phenomenon.
Yeah. Okay.
But I've read some of the books and it's like, they're awful.
All right.
They're awful.
I don't know anything about them.
But... Well, isn't, like, Edward Cullen in that... He can go out in the daytime, right? He just sparkles. That's like the joke about it. He just sparkles in the daytime, but he can't go out in the daytime. So they kind of went back to the old school on that one. Slasher Fred said there was a movie called Dracula Untold. Yeah, we saw that. We reviewed that a while back. I really liked that.
Yeah, good movie.
I really liked it. And then Mega says the last voyage can only be seen in the USA. It was pulled for the rest of the world.
No.
That's dumb.
No, why would it be?
That's dumb if they did that.
I didn't hear that.
I mean, I feel like it might, if they really did do that, I feel like it would be maybe even do better in other countries.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of like an old school gothic movie, and maybe like people in other countries would like that better than Americans. Maybe, I don't know. Hi, Pokey.
Only thing I heard that got pulled lately was Barbie got pulled in several countries. That's it. That's the only thing I heard about recently.
Joseph said The Thing bombed when it first came out. Now it's a classic. Will Demeter have the same fate? See, I'm not really sure. It's hard to tell. Yeah, there was a lot of movies that famously... Well, shit. I mean, even not only The Thing, but The Shining. When The Shining came out, I believe it got nominated for a Razzie Award, which is crazy. And that's like one of the best movies ever. And same thing with The Thing. It's just like, I don't know if The Thing got super shitty reviews. It's just like nobody was real into it. It did get some shitty reviews, I think, but people didn't really recognize, and that happens a lot. But then I mean, a movie might come out and, you know, people are like, eh, and then like 20 years later you see it and you're like, yeah, I get it. I get why nobody likes this shit. You know what I mean? So it's kind of hard to tell. I mean, I really liked this movie, but you know, everyone's opinion is different. I don't know. Ben said not putting Dracula in the title cost him $1 billion. Well, that's the thing. Like, in some territories, I think it was called Dracula Voyage of the Demeter. But maybe they thought calling it Dracula over here, everybody would be like, not Dracula again. Jesus Christ. You know, maybe. That's what I was thinking. Because I was thinking to myself, I mean, I immediately knew what Last Voyage of the Demeter was because I've read Dracula, and I thought, you know, most people were at least familiar enough with the lore, or at least seen enough Dracula movies to know what that was. No. But I guess not, because I said something about it at work, and they didn't know what that was. Yeah. I was like, you know, like from Dracula, the boat. Yeah. Okay.
She's always projecting her IQ on other people.
Well, it's hard. It's difficult for me. Yeah. Well, and it's not so much smarts. It's that, you know, I do realize that I'm into, you know, I'm really into horror shit. I'm really into like horror movies, and I'm really into horror books, and I know a lot about it. I know a lot about the history of it. So I always have to like temper my enthusiasm when I'm around other people, because I'll go off on these big tangents and they won't know what the fuck I'm talking about. No. And it's like, and then I get really like frustrated because then I have to go back and explain everything, and I hate having to do that. You know what I mean? So it's just, I'm like, get with the program. You know what I mean? But it's that kind of shit.
The average person isn't interested in any of this.
Huh?
The average person isn't.
I know,
interested in
and like I said, that's why I always found that like really, really frustrating.
You could probably go to your average 17-year-old and ask them about Dracula. They wouldn't really know anything about the original story.
Yeah, maybe not.
They would know nothing about that.
Maybe not.
Dracula, what's that? You know.
Although I will say, I think Dracula at least has penetrated the cultural zeitgeist to such a degree that everybody... I think, and I'm not sure if this, but I read this somewhere. I think that Dracula is the second most featured character, like fictional character, in filmdom ever. Do you know who the first one is?
No.
Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes is the first one, but I'm pretty sure Dracula's second. So they've made like a fuck ton of Dracula movies, or movies that have Dracula in them, because I think that also counts. Like anytime that he comes out like in a movie. But Slash and Fred said there was an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer where Buffy fought against Dracula. Yeah, I never like watched that show real consistently, but I always liked what I saw of it, and I do kind of remember that one. Yeah, Dracula became a recurring character. Leslie said the movie Pacific Heights 1990 is a Dracula movie too, I imagine. Shit, I haven't seen that in a long time now. I don't remember. There was also the Dracula 1979 movie with Donald Pleasance and Frank Langella. Yeah, I actually really like that. We were talking about that one just the other day when we were talking about Last Voyage of the Demeter, because I was wondering, I actually really like that movie. I have it, and I've seen it many, many times. But I always wondered about the weird thing where they switched Mina and Lucy. And that's not the only Dracula adaptation to do that, and I'm just like mystified as to why they felt the need, because it really didn't seem to... It didn't add to the story, it didn't take away from the story. I'm not really sure, so I'm not really sure like why they did that, but you know what I mean? I don't really get it. Mr. 88 says, tangentially related, Criterion just announced a Todd Browning box set, nice, including The Unknown starring Lon Chaney. This has been on my want list in the early 2000s, but never been available on any home media. Yeah, shit, man. That's like really, really hard to get hold of. I'm going to have to look into that, man. I'm going to have to get really into that. Ben says, really, I saw a preview screening here, but as far as I know, it's in Australian cinemas. Title is Voyage of the Demeter. I'm not really sure where... I just read that it was called Dracula Voyage of the Demeter, like in some territories, but... because I guess, like I said, they assumed that everybody in English-speaking countries would know what the Demeter was, but like I said, maybe they're overestimating people's intelligence or cultural knowledge, perhaps, because maybe some people didn't. But like I said, it's hard for me to judge because I've grown up with this shit my whole life. Like I said, I love scary shit, I love horror shit, and I have since I can remember, like since I could talk. So my life is like so steeped in it that it's like really hard. It's really hard to talk to people that aren't like into it the same way that I am. You know what I mean? Because then you have to like explain everything, and I find that really frustrating. So there's that. I mean, but yeah, the Dracula adaptation that I had when I was a little kid, before I was old enough to read the actual novel, was really cool. They used to have these little, this cover was kind of like pink, and it was like a comic book, but it was like a comic book, like it wasn't Cliff Notes, but it was like a shorter version of it. But the drawings of it were really cool. I still remember having that one. But yeah, so like I said, now prior to what we would consider vampires, and this was even before the ghoul shit came around, because I feel like that was kind of more like a Middle Ages type situation. Prior to that, you had, I guess, what we could call kind of like proto-vampire sort of creatures. Like there was even some like Egyptian goddesses and stuff that drank blood and crap like that. But you also had like Mesopotamia, you know, the ancient Romans, ancient Greeks, stuff like that. They had, mostly back then, and you would kind of consider this a vampire nowadays, but they were mostly like spirits essentially, or demons that that kind of drank blood, or that, you know, were kind of like possessing people's bodies and like made the bodies get up. So it was kind of more like, well, then Anne Rice kind of went in that direction too, like when she was talking about kind of the origins of the vampires. And wasn't it, the first, been a while since I've read them, but wasn't it like a ghost or a demon or something like that, like a poltergeist, yeah, that like inhabited.
It's a poltergeist that got into a damn pharaoh.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. Well, it got into. A pharaoh saw a poltergeist. And he sent in some investigators to try to figure out what it was, and somehow or another, a murder happened. He got killed, and and the poltergeist went into his blood. And he came back to life.
I think it was something like that.
Alive.
Like I said, it's been a while since I've read the Vampire Chronicles. I did read them all, but
he killed his wife.
Yeah,
and turned her into a poltergeist. Also, a vampire was a poltergeist possessing a person, basically. It was spread throughout the blood, and then as it spread out throughout vampires, it got weaker and weaker. Some vampires had more of the power of this thing, of this poltergeist. It was a bloodlusting poltergeist.
Yeah. So
there wasn't much to the poltergeist. It was very simple.
Yeah.
It didn't have a whole lot of intelligence.
So that's kind of, which is kind of why I liked that concept, because she was kind of hearkening back to like the really ancient ideas about what we would now consider vampires, where it's not like, it wasn't even back then, it wasn't even like a ghoul or anything. It was like still a revenant, I guess, like as in somebody that was dead and that got up and walked around. But it was usually because that person was kind of like possessed by a blood drinking demon, and it could happen to, and the whole stuff about like a vampire has to bite another vampire and then that turns into, that was a later addition as well. Mostly it was if you were a witch, or if you committed suicide or something like that and you died, like you would come back as this blood drinking revenant type of thing. So, and I think the same kind of thing happened with werewolves as well. Like it didn't, the stuff about getting bit by a werewolf turns you into a werewolf, that was also a later invention. That might not have even come about until the movies, like the Universal movies.
Werewolves are Roman. The oldest story that I remembered was from ancient Rome.
There was an older one than that. There was one from the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Oh, okay.
there's a reference to something that would be considered a werewolf.
Oldest one I knew about was Roman.
Yeah.
And it was a Roman army story. Something from about Roman legions. A guard got attacked by a wolf. He cut its arm off. And it got away. And then later, one of their men showed up in the infirmary with his arm missing.
Yeah. That's a pretty common...
Yeah.
And there's stories like that about witches, too, because I remember reading one when I was a kid that was called Sopdal, which was like an old, like, folkloric type of tale. And that was actually, like, a witch, but she turned into a big cat. And, like, so the cat got its paw cut off, but then the guy came back to the house and then his wife didn't have a hand. So that's a very common trope, like, in mythology.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of werewolf stories like that.
Well, the Romans had it.
Yeah.
And I think that was, I think it's mentioned in one of the Roman history books. It might have been Suetonius. I think it's where that comes from. I don't remember. Who was the Roman scientist that got killed during the fucking eruption of Mount Vesuvius? What's his name? I think he looked into that. If I remember correctly, he thought that maybe something like that existed. What was that guy's name? Pliny the Elder. I think Pliny the Elder looked into that. I think that's where that story came from. Pliny the Elder knew about that story. About the Roman army guy. And I think he thought it maybe existed, but they didn't know.
Yeah. Slasher Fred said, I wonder if the lore that a vampire could change into a wolf or a bat came from Dracula. As far as I know, yes. That was not... And interestingly, after Dracula came out, that also informed a lot of werewolf legends going forward. Specifically stuff about the werewolves being like a man-wolf rather than just... Because I kind of feel like most of the werewolves, going back to ancient times, were not necessarily like a half-man, half-wolf hybrid like you would see nowadays. But it was just literally a person turning into a wolf. Now, usually it was a big-ass wolf, and it was, like, a little bit different. But it wasn't like nowadays, like, these big, like, muscular, like, or wolves on two legs, like dog soldiers or something like that. It was more like just somebody turning into a wolf. That was very common.
In the Roman story, it was just a wolf.
Yeah. And like I said, you could tell that it wasn't a regular wolf, but it mostly just looked like a regular wolf. You know what I mean? Like, I think sometimes they said it was, like, bigger or meaner, like, more vicious or whatever. So you could tell that it wasn't the same. And the thing about vampires turning into bats, I'm pretty sure that came directly from the book. And I'm not entirely sure. I think where Stoker got that idea was because vampire bats... They're only called that because of Dracula. You know what I mean? Like, they weren't called vampire bats beforehand, and Stoker was like, oh, I'll just, put those two things together. What happened was that particular species of bat is not indigenous to Europe, where a lot of the vampire legends came from. They're actually indigenous to South America or, like, the New World. And they had just been discovered right around the time that Stoker was writing Dracula, as far as I'm aware. So I think that he put that in there because, like, oh, my guy drinks blood. These bats drink blood. It goes together. He can turn into a bat because he could turn into a fog and shit too. And I'm pretty sure that I'm not really sure where that came from. You know what I mean? But the bat thing, I don't. As far as I'm
a plague of rats too.
Yeah, that's right. As far as I'm aware, like there was no thing where a vampire could turn into a bat. The thing about like the old ancient vampires. Or, and even going up into the Middle Ages and stuff like that, they didn't really have any, like, magical powers, necessarily. I think maybe they could kind of teleport or something, but they weren't, like, super, super strong, or they couldn't, like, turn into mist or hypnotize people, or none of that kind of shit. That's pretty much all from the books and from movies. Like, I don't think any of that was... part of like I said, I don't think they had like any. They were like supernatural creatures, I think, but they weren't really like. They didn't have all the powers that, get attributed to them nowadays. Is what I'm saying. So yeah. Now the first time that the word vampire appeared in the English language, like I said, there had been vampire adjacent creatures prior to this, But the first time the vampire, this word appeared in the English language was in 1732. And it was kind of like some reports about, there were all these vampire epidemics in Eastern Europe, where people were, like I said, becoming convinced that these creatures were getting up out of their graves and like snacking on the townsfolk. And so all of these villagers were freaking out, and they were going in there and digging people's bodies up and doing all this shit to like try and keep them from coming out and like eating everybody, you know what I mean? And usually one big thing, and this, you know, this is another thing that and this, I think we talked about this when we talked about the Mercy Brown vampire case too, which was in New England. But this kind of shit usually happens when there's some kind of plague or some kind of like epidemic. In the Mercy Brown case, it was tuberculosis. I think like in some other cases it was all, and it's usually in a place where people don't know what the disease is. And so all of these people, like whole families are dying, and like nobody really knows why. So they're kind of just looking for somebody to blame, I guess. And because there's these stories about these revenants that go around drinking blood, and they're like, oh, well, that must obviously be the problem. So all we have to do is dig this motherfucker up, pin him to the ground, you know, cut his head off or whatever, put a lemon in his mouth like they do in some places. I don't know what that's going to do. But, you know, and then Bob's your uncle. Like, everything will be solved. Because it's like... Robert's your mother's brother, as they say. As they said in that other movie. But yeah, so it's, again, people that don't know a lot about disease looking for, and understandably, like, looking for a way to fix it. Because there's no way for them to fix it. They didn't have a cure for the Black Death or tuberculosis or anything like that back then.
I remember reading when I was a teenager that one of the earliest mentions or usages of the word vampire was done by a captain who was writing a letter. They had an old letter. Remember, some merchant, the captain of some merchant vessel was writing to somebody else, saying that that he was getting drunk. His blood was getting drunk and dry by a bunch of lawyers. He called them vampires. That was the. I remember that. You couldn't find that reference?
No. Well, I guess because he wasn't talking about actual vampires.
No, he was calling lawyers vampires.
Right, but that must have been after the 1730s then.
It was around that time.
Because the 1730s was the first, at least in English, unless it was like in a different language. Okay. Because like I said, there had been...
It was the first mention of the word vampire. The oldest that we have. I'm sure they were using that word before that time. But...
They're talking about...
Some kind of merchant vessel was using the word vampire. They were talking about lawyers.
Yeah, but like I said, by that time, I imagine it must have gone into like common usage. Because the first... English language use of it, as far as anybody knows.
I don't think it was spelled with a V. It was spelled with a W. Like vampire, like that.
Well, maybe that wasn't English then, because like I said, maybe because the first English language was 1732 that they know of, and that was referring to the actual.
In German, though,
creature.
fucking W was V, so it's
I
not
know.
the same thing.
I know, but I'm just saying, they're referring to like the actual creature, not just making a simile. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But yeah, so like a lot of people, like particularly up until the Middle Ages, actually even after the Middle Ages and into the modern day, like in some parts of the world, people did really believe in this shit so, you know, so vociferously that, you know, the minute something starts going wrong in the village, like people start dying and nobody knows why, they're going to go look for some motherfucker to dig up, you know what I mean? They're going to cut their heads off and do all that other kind of shit. Put, like, garlic in there. And it's funny because people were wondering about garlic, too. And I was just watching this other documentary, and he was saying that, he's like, garlic, he's like, it may seem kind of random, like that would ward off vampires and stuff. But you have to think that, and most of y'all probably know this, but before they understood the germ theory of disease, they thought that diseases were caused by, like, miasma. Smells. Like bad smells. So they figured that garlic, because it smelled so strongly, could like drive out smells that you didn't want. And so because the vampire was seen as akin to a plague in a certain way, or akin to a disease, then ergo, the strong smell of the garlic would keep it away. So it's not as dumb as it sounds, or it's not as random as it sounds, like, on its surface, I guess, when you think about it that way. Because I do kind of feel like they were still thinking that bad smells cause disease, like, up until the late 1800s, I want to say, before they figured that shit out, weren't they?
Well, they figured a smell had something in it.
Yeah, because it's...
Yeah.
Which isn't a dumb thing to think, because it's like, it does seem pervasive, and it does seem like it gets up your nose.
Particles.
Right. So it is just kind of like, so it's, like I said, that's not a stupid thing to think.
There are people today that don't understand how fucking shit's transmitted, you know. It's a big difference, like, for instance, acquired immunity. That's where you're around a person that's sick. You get a few of the damn bacteria in you, or a couple of particles in you that have the virus. It's a small amount of it, and your body fights it off. It learns how to fight it off. And you become immune to that disease. But that's a big difference between getting a little bit of it and getting bombarded by it and getting sick. You know what I mean? It's the same way a vaccine works. You can inject a small, weakened amount of it into a person, and they can learn an immunity. But the body can learn an immunity through exposure, too. But this last pandemic went around, people got so much misinformation and disinformation that they weren't following science. They were following fucking... What do you call it? It was voodoo. You can get exposed to something, and it's you can learn. Your body can learn an immunity to it. It's the same as a vaccine.
Well, if you're interested, actually, in the kind of dawn of vaccines and how that all came about, there's a really good book, and I think it's called The Speckled Monster, and it was about how they found the cure for smallpox.
Yeah.
And it's a great book. It's like a really... I mean, it's one of those, like, historical things that you wouldn't think this big, because it's a big chunker of a book, but the story behind it is just so compelling, and, like, all of the people behind it are so compelling. And the fact that they believed that it would work so much, like, this small group of people, that they were willing to, like, give it to themselves, and, you know, they were their own guinea pigs, and they saved, like, you know, millions of lives because they actually found a vaccine for smallpox.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a really good book. I think it's called The Speckled Monster. I can't remember who wrote it. It came out, like, years ago. I read it probably, like, 10 or 15 years ago, maybe. But yeah, it's really, really good. So yeah. So what were we saying? Okay. So because people back then didn't really understand the germ theory of disease, so when people died of tuberculosis or something like that, they're looking for some motherfucker to blame. They're looking for a scapegoat, right? So they're just like, okay, well, we're going to go stake that person. And then if they went and dug up the person, and the person looked like they were kind of like swollen, and had blood on their face, or they looked fresher than they thought that they should, then obviously that was proof that that person was a vampire. Like I said, this shit with fangs and all that kind of stuff, that came around much, much later. As far as I'm aware, none of the folkloric vampires had fangs. I think that was like a fictional invention that kind of came into the lore. And I think too that was where it kind of like cross-pollinated with werewolves a little bit too, because, you know, those two monsters kind of like cross-pollinated, especially like nowadays, because there's so much overlap, and they've done all the, you know, all the fictional like crossovers and stuff. But prior to that, I don't really think, because like I said, I'm pretty sure like vampires couldn't turn into wolves until Dracula came along. You know what I mean? Also, okay, so I always thought this was funny. So like I said, even though nowadays, like, vampire lore has it that you have to be bit by a vampire, or you have to like exchange blood with a vampire to like turn into a vampire. In the original book, Dracula, it seemed like, I thought it was like whoever he bit would eventually, like, when they died, they would turn into a vampire, which, like I said, doesn't seem sustainable over the long term, because eventually, like, and I think somebody actually mathematically figured this out, but I can't remember how long it would take. Not very long. Spoiler alert. But eventually, like, everybody on Earth would be vampires, and then there would be nobody left to eat. So later on, I think they did it where you had to like exchange blood. You know what I mean? Because then that way, you know, you could just kill them and shit like that. But the same thing would happen to werewolves. If every time a werewolf attacked somebody and just bit them and they didn't die, then they turned into werewolves. Pretty soon everybody would be werewolves, you know what I mean? So it's that kind of shit. But one of my favorite things, which this seems like it would be really hard to avoid, but in some countries, particularly in some Slavic countries, also in China, I believe, you could become a vampire, like, if after you were dead, like, an animal jumped over you. I'm not really sure where that came from, or, like, why that would specifically make you turn into a vampire, but that was one thing they believed. So it's like, don't let the cat jump over the dead body, like, you know, grandma's dead body or anything like that, or she's gonna come back as a Nosferatu and all that other kind of shit. But the Chinese vampires are actually pretty interesting, and there's kind of like a whole, I don't know if I'd call it a subgenre, but there are like a lot of Chinese movies with the vampire, and the vampires are similar, but they're slightly different. I think they're just kind of like a body. They're a revenant, but it's somebody like with the soul couldn't get out of the body or something, so he just like gets up and keeps walking around and he drinks blood and stuff. But the vampires there, they hop. And I've seen a couple of these movies. What are they called? Jiangxi, I think is what the Chinese vampires are called. And it's kind of hilarious. Like, I'm sorry I can't be intimidated by a monster that just, like, comes hopping at me like that, like a bunny rabbit. But I guess that's scary. And I don't know what the origin of that is. Because I've seen that in the movies. I'm like, what the fuck? And then, like, when I looked it up later, they're like, oh, yeah, Chinese hopping vampires. That's what they do. They hop. And I was just like, why? I don't know why. I'm sure it, like, makes sense to them. Do you know why Chinese vampires hop?
Because they can't walk.
Because they can't walk?
Yeah, and it has to be in a straight line, too. It doesn't make any sense.
Because I was just talking about those. It's called a Jiangxi, right?
Jiangxi, I think.
Yeah, like the Chinese vampires. And they're just like boing, 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 like coming after you. Gonna eat
There's a bunch of crazy rules.
Yeah, I don't get it either.
It has something to do with the Great Wall of China, too. The Great Wall, there isn't one wall, there's many of them, but the Great Walls of China were to keep those out, too. And ghosts out.
We gotta keep out them hopping vampires.
Ridiculous. Yeah. Couldn't
any of them like hop high enough to go over the wall?
I don't know.
Put the Chinese vampire in a little pogo stick. Boing, boing, boing. I wonder if anybody made a comedy over there about that. About Chinese vampires on pogo sticks. That would be hilarious. Please tell me if there's a movie like that, because I kind of want to see it. But yeah, so I was saying that in China and in some Slavic countries, you would also turn into a vampire, like if your dead body got jumped over by like a cat or something. Or a dog, or any animal that jumped over your dead body would like turn you into a vampire. And like I said, also if you had practiced witchcraft or did like some sinning or something like that, anybody was in danger, you didn't have to be bit by a vampire. That kind of shit would just happen. So we talked a little bit about this before, but there was also, if you didn't want your relatives coming back and snacking on you, then you could bury them upside down, like face down. You could bury them with sickles, like sharp farm implements. Sharp farm implements. That's what I was trying to say. I'm not drunk, I swear. Not yet, anyway. You could do that. Like I said, you could throw out the rice or the nuts or whatever, so they would have to like count it all and they would never get up. That kind of shit. Also, some people would also like cut the tendons like on their knees or their ankles so they couldn't like walk around, or they would put like a bunch of shit in their mouth, like rocks or bricks. I think actually like archaeologists dug up, I can't remember where it was, but they dug up this grave of this woman and she had like a big ass like brick like stuffed in her mouth, and they thought that it was maybe, I mean there was some other shit in there too, but they think that was maybe to keep her from coming back as a vampire, because they put like a bunch of shit in your mouth so you can't come and like bite people, you know what I mean? And that's another thing, too, is that I think originally, when the vampires came back to feed on you, they didn't necessarily, I don't think they were necessarily biting the necks. I think they, like, bit them, like, in the chest, like, over their heart. So I think maybe the biting the neck thing, that might have also been a fiction only. What happened in Carmilla? I haven't read that in a long time.
I don't know. My sinuses are starting to loosen up now.
That's good.
I'm getting where I can just starting to be able to breathe through my nose. All these drugs I'm taking, trying to loosen all this up. I can't stand it.
And the booze is probably helping too.
Let's just. I'm just gonna pretend that the booze is. The alcohol is going in to my bloodstream, and it's like an antiseptic. It's wiping out all those fucking.
Yeah,
invading.
that's how I like to think of it.
Yeah,
it's good for you.
Yeah, I'm gonna pretend. It's probably not true, but we'll see.
mean, it's good for you. I kind of feel like. But yeah, so in case, like I said, there were a lot of other ways you could identify. Oh my goodness, that you could identify.
Don't call attention to it. Just do it.
Well, it's kind of hard not to, because it's kind of like drowning me out. You know what I mean? And I remember hearing about this when I was a kid, because I had like all these books about vampires and witches and shit like that when I was little. And I remember remember those books they used to sell on TV that were, what were they called? Like The Unexplained or The Supernatural or something like that. But it was like a whole set of books.
Those Time Life books.
Yeah, they were the Time Life books. Yeah.
It's called Man, Myth, and Magic.
Yeah, well, there was a couple different sets of it. Like, I had some of those, and I had some of the other ones, too. And they had, like, all real nice illustrations in them and shit. And the vampire one, I'm pretty sure had, like, a really nice painting of this. But there was a thing where if they suspected that somebody was a vampire, they'd get a virgin boy. Had to be a virgin, so I guess it was, like, a little kid. yeah, you would hope. And would ride them around on a horse, which was also a virgin.
The horse had to be a virgin.
The horse had to be a virgin too. This is hardcore. And so they would ride them around the cemetery, and whatever grave that the horse stopped at or wouldn't walk by or wouldn't walk over or something like that, they're like, oh, that's where the vampire's grave is. You know what I mean? Most of the time it was the black horse, but some countries had white. Also, if you had like a bunch of holes like around your grave, I guess that was also kind of a thing. But yeah, so as I mentioned, vampires back then, nothing like nowadays. They all looked kind of gross, and I was kind of thinking of them looking like ticks, you know what I mean? Where they're all kind of fat with blood because they've been feeding on everybody. Because that's obviously what you would think. Also, there were in some countries, vampires could also do like poltergeist kind of shit.
Jeff Yar says Mysteries of the Unknown by Time Life.
That's what it was. That's what it was. Thank you. Yeah, I had a bunch of those. Yeah, but Man, Myth, and Magic was another set.
Another series
set because I had some of those too, and some of them I checked out of the libraries, but because you like ordered them, and they would send you a new one every month, right?
Yeah,
it was something like that, and I could never afford it, but I had a couple of them.
That's before VHS. You had to get the shit on books.
Yeah, I still get shit on books.
Well, people bought encyclopedias back then too.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, Leslie.
This one was the fucking Old West one.
Those were kind of cool too.
Yeah, my dad has them. He has all of them. They're leather bound, all fancy, good photographs in them.
Ben said, "Didn't Dracula establish the thing about him creating vampires by sharing blood?" That's what I mean. I'm pretty sure that was Dracula, or maybe like a little bit later, because prior to that, you didn't have to have been bitten by a vampire to turn into a vampire or anything like that.
It was just a curse.
Yeah, it was just kind of like a curse, or like I said, if just some random shit happened to you, like grandma's dead body's laying on the floor and the cat jumped over it. Oh shit, she's a vampire.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like sometimes it was just as easy as that. So it was all like very superstitious kind of stuff. So, like I said, I can kind of see like when fiction writers got involved in it, they're like, well, obviously we need to make this shit a lot harder, otherwise everybody would be vampires. Like I said, I'm pretty sure somebody mathematically figured out how long it would take. Like if every time a vampire bit somebody, that person turned into a vampire, like how long it would take for the whole world to be vampires, and it's not very long. It was only like a few months or something, because it would like get exponentially.
Anne Rice answered all that. Vampires selected certain people to become vampires.
Yeah,
they mostly killed people,
which I kind of feel like would be the same with werewolves, because like later on, and like I said, I think this probably came from the werewolf movies, like the Universal movies, but the whole thing where if a werewolf bites you, then you become a werewolf too.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the same thing. Like everybody would be werewolves but I feel like most of the time when a werewolf attacks you, it would just tear your fucking face off.
And you youngsters have not read Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles, go ahead and read them. Start with Interview with the Vampire, the very first one. They're great books. And you won't find anything modern like this. You know, it's very detailed and very reasonable. It makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense on the occult level too. Anne Rice knew what she was talking about.
Well, she did do a lot of research for that, and I actually like the Mayfair Witches saga too. Was actually pretty good. I like the vampire ones more.
Vampires had their own culture. They selected certain people to become vampires based upon how good looking you were, how much money you had, if you had a nice house or not, because they would like to steal that. You know, they'd like to add you to their mafia, and so. There were certain people that were like included in possible vampire and excluded. They also liked people to be. They liked to select people that had charisma, but they liked ruthless killers to become a vampire. Because they didn't want any soft-hearted people being vampires, because they wouldn't survive.
Well, because you have to
be
kill
like
people.
Louis.
You have to kill.
He's
people.
one of the characters in the book.
Or you'd have to eat rats.
Right.
And I would have
Louis was a soft-hearted vampire. He didn't like the fact that he had to kill to survive.
Jeffy Art said, reminded me of the scene with the horse at Mina's grave in Dracula in 1979. Yeah, that's right. They did actually show that trope in the 1979 movie. Leslie said, no one Dracula movie showed Lucy killing the kids. Why? I think the Francis Ford Coppola one did actually suggest, because didn't Lucy come back to her, when she came back to her crypt, she was holding like a bloody baby, right? And she dropped it.
Yeah.
Didn't they have that in there?
She came in with an infant.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. She had, the infant was like.
They challenged her and she dropped it on the ground.
Yeah.
Tried to get back in the casket.
Yeah, that's right.
Killed her,
so the Francis Ford Coppola one did show that.
Yeah.
But a lot of them don't.
And she looked hot as fuck. She was fucking pale and shit. There's blood coming out of her eyes. She says, like,
I mean.
Drop that baby. I think the baby was dead too, wasn't it?
I thought it was crying because wasn't that because it was crying when she came in the
I think it was crying.
Well, yeah, I kind of liked that because that was one thing that always like horrified me about the original story. Like that, I always thought that was one of the scariest things, was that she was going around killing babies essentially, or like toddlers, just like snatching them.
Well, Anne Rice called it. She said, new vampires were weak. They had to go after weaker victims and weaker prey. So they started,
which makes total sense.
Yeah,
they haven't got all their fucking powers yet.
They start off weak, and then over the centuries, they got stronger and stronger. And you could make a vampire strong or weak depending on if you were a vampire that had decent strength. You could make another vampire strong or weak depending on how much blood you allowed him to drink from you or her. They didn't have sex; they were asexual, but they loved each other. It was a weird kind of like asexual. They needed to have some kind of a companionship towards each other. They would just get all fucking man crushy on each other or whatever, but their idea of sex was sharing blood,
which is still like swapping bodily fluids, so it's kind of similar. I get it.
They were possessed by this damn poltergeist spirit, made them lust for blood, but it also gave them powers that a poltergeist have. And I've seen poltergeist. You guys go back if you're new to the show. Yeah. Telekinesis, dreaming true, knowing things, cryptic knowledge, knowing things you shouldn't be able to know, weird stuff like that. But a vampire could do that. Reading that, they didn't get into that until I think what was called Lasher.
Yeah, that was the book I was thinking of.
I started reading about Lasher and shit, and I was like, man, she did her homework, man.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's possible with Poltergeist. I don't know if it's possible. It would have happened already. You'd see vampires, and you don't see them.
Unless they're real sneaky.
Yeah, unless they're listening to this show, come get me, and we'll talk. You know where I live. We'll have a whole discussion about it.
Mr. 88 said everyone with children would be vampires because toddlers bite. Ankles, but bite nonetheless. That's pretty funny. Toddler vampires. That's pretty entertaining. Jeffy Art said a world of vampires sounds like the plot of Daybreakers with Ethan Hawke in the movie The Blood is Running Out. I've been wanting to... I think I saw it a long time ago, and I've actually been wanting to rewatch that because I remember that being really good and like really underrated.
I mentioned this in the other show. vampires are not the main thing, though. Vampires are just popular in the West. Conceivably, a vampire can only be created by a stragoi, which is like the king of the undead. They're like a vampire, but their whole thing is
that's like the Romanian version.
Yeah, they're like a vampire. They look like a rat-like being, and they're kind of like the kings of the undead and the dead. And their whole thing was familial relationships. They were all very family-oriented. They could have wives or husbands, depending on whatever sex they were. And they could crossbreed with living people and corpses and the undead. So these are like the kings of the undead. And if you look at the rules of the stragoi, it looks like a stragoi could have sex with an undead person, and that undead person would give birth to a living undead, that would kind of be like a vampire. So conceivably, Dracula might have been the offspring, in that version of the lore, an offspring of a mortal woman and a stragoi. That would make a vampire. And then that vampire could reproduce by spreading the vampirism. But that would be a subspecies. That wouldn't be the real species. The real species would be
taxonomy of vampire.
Yeah, the real species would be a stragoi, which were better than a vampire. They were a lot stronger. Not only because they could do all this weird shit with the dead and the undead, and to like have sex with a dead body, and it would give birth to a half dead, half living creature, like a zombie or a ghoul. They were also sorcerers, and when you start mixing that kind of shit with magic, sorcery, oh man, that's unstoppable. Because Dracula, of the vampires, they had mental powers evidently, but it wasn't sorcery. These guys had sorcery. That's like not giving Nazis magic, Magic Nazis,
no one
space
wants
Nazis.
to do that. That's going to be a bad time.
Yeah, now the Nazis got magic.
Well, like I was saying before, I'm pretty sure like vampires having hypnotism powers or being like, come to me or whatever, or like mind powers. I'm pretty sure that was a fairly recent invention that might have come from Dracula or like a little bit before. But I did mention earlier that in some cultures, vampires could do poltergeist shit, or poltergeist shit would happen like when there was a vampire around too. But I don't know how common that is.
Jeff ER's talking about half-human vampires. Yeah. Well, look, we talk about the half-human vampire. We're also talking about Blade, one of my favorite vampire fucking series, except Blade 3 sucked. But fucking Jeffrey, what's his name? What's his name?
Wesley Snipes.
Wesley Snipes. Wesley Snipes playing fucking Blade. And he was the offspring of a living woman and a vampire. And he could walk around during the day. He had some vampire abilities, but he had a lot of human attributes too. Great movies. They're evidently trying to fucking reboot that. They're gonna fuck that up. Blade was fucking from the 90s, man, and it belonged in the 90s.
I mean, it's such a 90s.
It's a 90s fucking movie. And one of my favorite vampire series, even though it's not like any of the other ones. It's its own thing. It's action. Very testosterone fueled. The only other series that's kind of close to that is the one with the vampires and the damn werewolves. What was the name of that one? That had the girl?
Underworld.
I
didn't like that.
I saw a couple of them. I liked them. I need to go back and revisit that.
I just remember not really... action horror is not usually my thing. And I don't usually... And honestly, I don't even know if I would call Underworld a horror movie necessarily. It's just kind of more like an action movie that happens to have horror-type monsters in it. You know what I mean? Like, it's not scary. So, I don't know. So I don't usually like that kind of... I do like Blade, and I like some other ones that are more action-oriented. But I just remember not really liking Underworld. And I really did not like Van Helsing at all. That was a terrible, terrible movie. I love Hugh Jackman, but nope, wasn't having that. But you know what I mean? I don't know. And I've said there's a lot of vampire movies that I really, really like. Vampires are not usually my to-go to monster. You know what I mean? It's just kind of like, usually I'm just kind of like, it's a vampire movie, you know what I mean? But I don't know. Some of them are good. I like the old school ones, like the Universal ones. I like the Hammer ones with Christopher Lee. I like all those. Somebody mentioned Horror of Dracula, which also had Lucy bringing a kid into the tomb, and that's right. I had forgotten all about that one. We just reviewed that not too long ago, the 1958 one. So yeah, that did have Lucy bringing. She was. I don't think the kid was all bloody or anything, but she did have her like bringing a kid. So they did like acknowledge that. I can see why they don't, because they're cowards and they don't want. But it was in the book. It was in the book. I mean, you know what I mean. But yeah, I don't know. I tend to like. I really liked The Hunger from 1983, which was based on a book by Whitley Strieber, a.k.a. the guy that got anal probed by aliens. It's a good book, though. I liked that because it had like a vampiric romanticism to it, particularly the movie, which was directed by Tony Scott. But it also had like a modern scientific veneer on it.
Oh, my sinus has opened up.
Oh,
all of a sudden, I can speak normally now.
Yeah.
Man, okay.
But I liked the trope that, in case you haven't seen it, in The Hunger, the main vampire in that is named Miriam, who's played by Catherine Deneuve. And she is an ancient vampire. Like, they even show, like, some flashbacks. She's, like, in ancient Egypt or some shit like that. So she's, like, thousands of years old. And she's evidently... I think they imply that she might be the only one. But she keeps trying to make vampiric companions because she's lonely. Problem is that when she exchanges blood with these humans, like attempting to make them a vampire, like they'll live for 2 or 3 centuries and then they start aging very rapidly, but they're still functionally immortal. So they're essentially, their body is rotting while they're still alive. So that was like a really horrifying concept, and I really like that concept, and that hasn't really been done much in movies. You know what I mean? And I know it was from, like I said, it was from a book. That was. But I always really, really liked that concept, and I kind of wish some more... Well, I guess you couldn't really do that because it's so specific that everybody would know where it came from. You know what I mean? Leslie Russell said, Queen of the Damned copied the end of The Hunger 83, the vampires killing the queen. Yeah, it did kind of. And they were talking about Daughters of Darkness, that was great. Yeah, I really like that one too. That was kind of like, that's kind of a loose, I mean, was Daughters of Darkness was the one that was like a loose adaptation of Carmilla. There's been a lot of adaptations of Carmilla, and I've never seen one that was like super great. I haven't read Carmilla in a long time. That's another thing I need to reread. You know what I mean? Ben says, was Dhampir invented for the Blade comic?
I don't know.
As a concept, that word has been around for centuries. So I'm not really sure, because I haven't read the Blade comics, so I don't know exactly what the monster is in that lore. But that concept has been around for
People
a really,
forget
really
about
long time.
Blade, man. That was a great. Those 2 movies were great. Loved them. Really good vampire movie. But like I said, that's an action adventure.
Yeah. Like I said, it's not. I wouldn't even call it a horror movie. It's got gore and shit like that, but it's not like
action adventure vampire movie. If you haven't seen it, go ahead and see it.
Joseph mentions Near Dark, which was another great fucking... That was a great fucking vampire movie. It's almost like a vampire western. We reviewed that one not too long ago, too, now that I'm thinking about it. John Robertson, did you ever figure out where the native soil thing came from, or was that just from Dracula? Pretty sure that was just from Dracula, and I'm not really sure... I mean, that's the thing. I kind of feel like Bram Stoker did so much research when he was writing this book. He just like combed through legends and folklore and stuff like that from all over Europe. So he must have got that from somewhere, but I don't really know where he got it from. I mean, it's possible that he just completely made it up because, you know, to give Dracula a bit of a weakness. It's like, oh, he always has to sleep in these boxes with his native earth in it. Like, it gives him, like, a vulnerability.
Yeah, some kind of restriction.
Right, because otherwise he would be too powerful, like, you wouldn't be able to defeat him. You have to give the villain, like, some weaknesses.
Gotta have rules.
Right.
Mr. 88 says, I'm looking like a Jack Ming the Merciless. Thank you for saying so, man, because actually that was the idea. Fucking... My hair was starting to suck, and I was like, man, my hair kind of fucking sucks. I'm going to shave this shit off. What's the coolest looking bald dude that's out there? For me, man, fucking Max von Sydow, man, fucking Ming the Merciless. So I said, I'm going to do like a Ming look. Yeah, so that was kind of the idea.
Yeah.
When you get jacked, you look better when you're bald. If you're not jacked, you don't look as cool bald. I don't know what it is.
That's the rules.
Yeah.
Just like
so if you're gonna be bald, you better be jacked.
Bald guys have rules.
Or real skinny.
That works too.
Yeah. Fucking in that movie, Max was not jacked. Of course, he was thin. And fucking Max Sydow was the shit, man.
I love Max.
Yeah, he's fucking great. He was one of those dudes that looked old even when he was young.
Like I said, he was in some Ingmar Bergman movies, like back in the fucking 60s.
Yeah.
And it was like, he didn't look like an old man, but he didn't look like a young man either.
No, it's because Sydow always had fucking gravitas.
Yeah,
he had a lot of weight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was great in, what's that Ingmar Bergman movie? Hour of the Wolf.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that movie. If you're real into David Lynch and you haven't seen Hour of the Wolf, the Ingmar Bergman movie, please watch it because you'll see where David Lynch got some of his ideas from. That movie is like creepy as shit. It's probably like, I think it was like the closest thing to like a horror movie that Ingmar Bergman ever did. It's like super creepy.
Me and Jen were gonna make a fucking Clytus and fucking General Kala outfits for fucking cosplay.
Yeah.
But now the way I look, I actually should do a jacked Ming.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to do Clytus. I could do Ming, and Jen could do fucking General Kala.
Yeah, that would be cool.
You just gotta make that fucking headdress and that fucking collar that she had. That shit was fucking stupendous. You had to make that by hand. You couldn't make that any other way. They spent a lot of money on those costumes.
Yeah, they're cool looking.
Yeah, and they don't show on VHS. You gotta see that shit in HD. Flash Gordon in HD looks fucking fantastic. That's the way it looked in the theater when I saw it as a kid. I saw it, I think, 3 times in a fucking row when it came out. I loved it. I loved it just as much as I liked Star Wars. There were certain elements I liked better than Star Wars. It had sex and drugs in it. It was like sex, fucking power potions, which were like Viagra. Fucking forcing chicks to marry you and shit. It had some wild concepts. Star Wars kind of played it safe, but the thing is that's the way the Flash Gordon source material was, though. If you watch the original,
yeah, we just watched one of the original serials from the 30s the other day. It's on Tubi.
They were wild, man.
Yeah, I mean they couldn't get away with as much in the 30s as they can nowadays, but
you can read between the lines.
But you can still read between the lines.
You know what they were talking about?
They did get away with a lot of shit, like more than I would have expected, you know. But yeah, so fun fact, like I mentioned about the stakes before. Sometimes metal stakes and shit like that didn't work. It had to be wood, and depending on where you lived, it had to be a particular kind of wood. I think the most common one was aspen because the legend was that that's what Jesus's cross that he was crucified on, that's what wood that was made out of. So that was how that went. But it's like some other cultures used like hawthorn or some other like woods like that. But I think aspen was like the most common. And like I said, it's weird because I don't know if they'd say like, oh, metal stake doesn't work, but a lot of them, it had to be wood, like it had magical properties. And, you know, obviously decapitation, also a pretty fail-safe method, which, like I said, will kill pretty much anybody, not just a vampire. But my favorite thing about the decapitation thing is that some cultures, like I think in Germany and like some other places, like some other Eastern European regions, they not only cut the head off, but they would take the head and put it somewhere else. Like they put it like between their feet or like behind their butt or something like that. Actually, I think I want to say it was like in 1990, like archaeologists like uncovered this, and I can't remember where it was, but they uncovered this grave that they figured whoever had buried this person or whoever had dug up and reburied this person like thought this person was a vampire because they had gone in there and like rearranged their body. You know what I mean? Like they took the head and like put it in the middle and then like took their femur bones and like crossed so it looked like a skull and crossbones type of situation. But they were thinking that maybe because they found that's kind of, I don't know if I'd say it was cool or not, but I mean, you know, they've been dead a long time, but archaeologists do find more than occasionally grave sites where they're pretty sure that the villagers thought this person was a vampire because they'll dig it up and there's like fucking stakes all stuck through there and heads cut off and stuck up their butt and shit like that. So it's all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, John said that fucking Flash Gordon was more irreverent. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
It was definitely. It was more party, drugs, rock and roll. Fucking, I liked it. But Star Wars, I think, evidently was originally supposed to be like that. Star Wars originally was supposed to have like a disco soundtrack to it and everything.
I can't even imagine. I mean, I'm sure somebody on YouTube has made a fan edit, like just to see what it would be like.
Yeah.
But Mr. 88 said, but Star Wars had incest, like pre-taboo.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, kind of did.
Kind of. But,
yeah, because they fucking retrofitted that shit. They were like, oh, they're brother and sister now. Now everybody's going to be weirded out by all that flirtation that happened in the first movie.
Dino De Laurentiis Studios was the best fucking candidate for Flash Gordon. Same with Dune back in the day. They were real good with fucking sci-fi, but they weren't good at making money at the box office with their sci-fi. That was the weird thing about it. I don't know why those movies didn't really take off, because they're both classics now. They couldn't follow up for some reason. Like they should have made sequels to Flash Gordon. It probably would have been pretty good. But they were just like, De Laurentiis Studios was always fucking up. They fucked up a lot. Like they should have made a John Milius rated R follow up to fucking Conan. They had a good property right there. There was gonna be 2 more Conan movies by him, but they didn't want to pay Milius's price. And they said, well, we want to go PG on the second Conan, and it just fucking sucked.
That's never a good idea.
They tried to
especially if the first one was R.
And that's not what De Laurentiis Studios was about anyway. They were supposed to be kind of like the off-brand, you know, and they were supposed to be like the fucking the indie fucking studio. They should have fucking stuck to their guns and did Conan the Destroyer with fucking John Milius, because his trilogy, he had this shit fucking planned out. It was going to be great. It was going to end with King Conan, but they didn't do it. It was going to be like a prehistoric answer to Star Wars, and he had it right. Milius knew what he was doing, even though it wasn't quite the same character as from the books, you know, but it was still good enough. It was great for the screen, because he was teaching fucking Wagnerian, or not Nietzschean lessons, you know. It had a mythos behind it already.
Zach says, fun fact, De Laurentiis actually produced a couple of Bergman's movies for whatever reason. That is very funny, and I actually didn't know that. He just had his little fingers in all the pies, didn't he?
Yeah.
One thing, here's one thing that I guess I never really made this association, but you know, in Hebrew mythology, Lilith.
Yeah.
Who...
That's also a vampire.
Yeah, I mean, technically, she's kind of like... Well, she was Adam's first wife.
Yeah.
In some of the stories. Although, where the character came from is much older. I believe it's from ancient, Babylonian. And originally, I think in the Babylonian stories, and then I think again later on, she kind of became a demon-type figure where she would go around, like, drinking the blood of babies and shit like that.
Yeah,
it was kind of like the ancient Greek, the Lamia and all that kind of stuff.
If I remember correctly, she tried to fuck Adam by trying to get on top. She tried to be fucking dominant. That was the beginning of the problems. You know what I mean?
It's like, no, we want some woman that's going to keep her mouth shut.
She's trying to be too much like a man,
and go make me a sandwich, bitch.
Yeah, well, she's just trying to be too much like a man, and fucking, she got thrown out.
Yeah, she actually had a mind of her own, so they're like, demon! That's how that used to work back in the old days. But yeah, they turned her bitch ass into a demon. Like, can't blame her. Shit, man. But yeah, so there was a lot of that kind of shit going on. Like I said, even though I don't know if technically you call it it's kind of like a vampire, because she goes around like eating. She's kind of a cannibal too, I guess, because she eats people, but she also like drinks blood and shit like that. But yeah, so there was something else that I wanted to say. Where was it? It was like way down here. I was kind of laughing too, because there's kind of like a big. Every now and then, I'm really amused by all of the theological discussions that they used to have back in the Middle Ages. It just makes me... It always, like, amuses the shit out of me that grown-ass men were having these very, very serious theological debates over the nature of demons and vampires and stuff like that. It's just, I don't know. And I know people still do it nowadays, and it's still funny. But it's like back then, it's just so funny because these are like the most learned men in the society and all this other kind of stuff, and they're actually like meeting in these rooms, and it's all very serious and very glum and everything, and they're just talking about just the most ridiculous. You know what I mean? It would just be like people talking about, like, nowadays, like, fucking fictional, like, the MCU or something, like, as though it was real, as though all these people were real and all these people had magic powers and shit like that, but talking about it, like, super, super seriously. So they're writing these fucking, you know, treatises, like the fucking Pope wrote one and, like, mentioned vampires and shit like that. I think they kind of had a little bit, and I think this happened a little bit with werewolves, too, is that they almost kind of wanted to be, like, they wanted them to, like, not exist. But then, like, if they did exist, then they had to be, like, demonic kind of thing. So they were almost kind of, like, it was almost kind of like a weird, like, catch-22 they had going on. But it's, like, that always, like, makes me laugh that to think about all these very, very serious dudes, like, sitting around having these very, very serious theological discussions about vampires. Yeah. And, like, what they were going to do about it. And it's just, like, I don't know. It's just very funny to me. I know it's, like, not funny because the implications of... Particularly not so much with vampires, but I mean that fucks some people over too. But especially with like witchcraft, and that shit was not funny because, you know, a lot of people got horribly tortured and killed because they actually believe in witches and shit. But there was some crossover there with werewolves as well, because I don't know if you guys know, but you know everybody knows about the witch trials, but there were werewolf trials too, because werewolves and witches were kind of seen as related. So some people were hauled in on witchcraft charges, and some of the charges were being a werewolf or changing into a wolf, which was also considered.
Mr. 88 points out, this is true, that Star Wars exists because George Lucas couldn't get the rights to Flash Gordon. So Star Wars is a Flash Gordon knockoff, actually. But a good knockoff. Became its own thing.
Yeah.
But it's funny how De Laurentiis Studios got the fucking rights to fucking Flash Gordon, though, and made a movie that flopped. But I liked the movie. I thought it was great.
Well, and I think it's aged really well.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's... I like it a lot better now than I did the first time that I saw it. Like, it really kind of...
Well, I understand the source material now, a lot better now, you know. But I liked it when I saw it. I was like, this is great. I mean,
I don't even remember.
It was definitely a trip. I was like, man, this would be great to see high, you know.
We should do that one of these days.
Yeah, get high as fuck and watch Flash Gordon.
That sounds like a party, actually. Yeah. We should probably do that. I'd be like,
ooh, big screen and shit, fuck with all the fucking
pretty. It would be like that. It would be like. So let's talk a little bit about before. I don't want to like go on all night and I still need to talk about werewolves.
Yeah.
But I do kind of want to talk about a couple of other vampiric creatures, and I think a couple of these we maybe talked about them like on our, because then we do like a kind of weird cryptids kind of show.
Yeah.
And there are some vampire-like creatures from other cultures, that are pretty fucking crazy. You know what I mean? And in particular, I'm thinking about the ones from Malaysia. And Indonesia and stuff, and they make like a ton of movies with these.
What's up, Oscar? How you doing, bud?
Hey, what's up? Dog Soldiers is the greatest werewolf movie. Oh, it's certainly up there. There's a lot of good werewolf movies.
Oh man, The Howling One, man, was fucking great.
American Werewolf in London.
Yeah.
And the Howling One is good.
Yeah.
We just rewatched Ginger Snaps the other day too, which I really like. Ginger
Snaps 2 is good.
Yeah, we haven't watched the third one yet.
No, let's see the third
one. It's kind of like a prequel, like it's set a long time ago. But, but the ones I'm thinking of are, and I'm not really sure I'm pronouncing this correctly, but there's one called Manananga, and that's the one, they're usually women, so I think this is almost kind of like an offshoot of like I said, like the Lamia or the Lilith kind of demon, where it's a woman that can pull off her entire torso. Like, the whole torso flies around. Like, it sprouts bat wings and shit. And it goes around. And these... They pretty much specifically target pregnant women. Maybe not always, but I kind of feel... That's it's like Malaysia, Indonesia,
they
like
have
right
a
around.
Pentagalon, which is the
Yeah,
head
it's a similar kind of thing where it's like where it's the head, but it's also all the organs,
the organs,
like hanging down,
yeah.
and like the head flies around. And
I saw a movie,
and they had like a really long tongue.
Yeah,
and they go in there and like scoop babies out their mom's wombs.
We saw a Pentagalon movie.
Yeah, there's a lot of those.
Yeah, and they're good, man,
because it's like a big thing over there.
Over there, they take that shit seriously. They're like, that's right, the head did come off. And they actually stick to the lore and everything. It was good.
And they have some, like I said, there's a slightly different one where the whole torso comes off, and I think she has wings.
Right.
But it's a similar kind of thing, and I think she also goes after pregnant women. Like I said, they have super long tongues too. I'm pretty sure. But yeah, we did. I don't remember what the one was that we saw, but yeah, it was the one.
It was good. And every time they would stick to the lore and do the crazy shit from the lore, and they would
with all the guts hanging off,
and they would zoom in on it like da da da, like it is. It really does. And the head comes out. It was great.
Yeah, Ben said Lilith was willful and disobedient, and she abandoned Adam. I think she was originally a Babylonian goddess. Yeah, it was just kind of like everything else at that time. A lot of the ancient beliefs that had been around for thousands of years got co-opted. It was just kind of the same way that when Christianity kind of took over, it kind of took all the old pagan religions and like made all that shit into demons. It either incorporated them or made them into like bad guys.
Kind of like recast them.
Right.
It's because when you're writing Holy Scripture, and this is like one of the rules of writing Holy Scripture that they've been following for thousands of years, the things that are accepted as common belief in religions have to be addressed in the new religion. So you have to mention them and recast them or reboot them as something else. That's why you have Tiamat, the space dragon, showing up, or the cosmic fucking chaos dragon showing up in the New Testament. Because people believe that, well, those were around. Our ancestors believed in them, so those things existed, you know. But what are they really like? Well, it says right here. You know, that's all they're doing. It's just like comic book fans referring to older comic books and older superheroes. That's all they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a good analogy.
Yeah.
Like, I know that people like maybe get offended.
They get offended.
Like if you say it's like comic books or like the MCU or something like that, but it's exactly the same.
Exactly the same. These are mythologies.
It's just storytelling.
Right.
I mean, that's how humans write stories.
You go back and you go read some Joseph Campbell, like God of a Thousand Faces or The Power of Myth. Those stories were real to those people because there were real meaning behind them, cultural meanings behind them. They had to address them constantly over and over again, and they're handed down to you. So anything from the Old Testament, the Septuagint, Torah, or the New Testament, they're talking about other Babylonian and Mesopotamian and Greco-Roman gods constantly in there. They're just kind of rebooting them slightly.
Yeah.
But the people of those days knew exactly who they were talking about. They knew.
Well, yeah, like I said, and I think a lot of the sometimes confusion or people reinterpreting things nowadays is because you don't have the same cultural context as the people back then at the time had. So it's like we're looking at it through a completely different cultural lens than they would have been looking at it.
Yeah.
So I think that's where some of the problem arises.
And
but
they were all stories just to teach lessons. You know, there was. What's a good way to put it? What is orthodoxy today was heresy when it came out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So a lot of stuff is in there that you as a Christian or a Muslim would think was fucking heretical. But no, that was orthodoxy when that shit came out. Yeah, it's orthodoxy now. But they're talking about older gods. You know, you have to talk about the older gods. Your ancestors believed in them.
Yeah.
So how do you explain them? It's all included in there.
Joseph says Whitley Strieber wrote The Wolfen. That's right, he did. Not sure if this is considered a werewolf story. It's kind of tangentially a werewolf story.
I liked the movie as a kid. I haven't seen it in forever.
I've been wanting to rewatch that, actually. I read the book as a teenager, and I don't remember much about it. But I remember seeing the movie on cable many times back in the 80s.
You're like a psychically linked wolf.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. It's not exact. It's kind of more like a crime, like a murder mystery, kind of more than like a horror movie. necessarily, but I remember like really liking it.
Whitley Strieber, that's a crazy motherfucker right there.
I was just talking about him earlier because he also wrote the novel that The Hunger was based on.
Yeah.
Like, he's written some good ass books, but he's a little bit of a weirdo.
He's a lunatic.
How dare you?
Yeah. Electrolux King.
In case you're new here, please watch. Well, I don't know if I want to say this or not. I'm not saying please watch it, but if it sounds funny to you, you know his book Communion, where Whitley Strieber actually really does seem to believe that he was abducted by aliens and was anal probed by said aliens, and I think that's kind of where the whole anal probe trope came from, probably from that book, because that book's been out a long time. So they made a movie of it with Christopher Walken, of all people.
Yeah.
What year did that movie come? We just reviewed it like a few months ago.
This 90s, wasn't it?
I think it was 90s.
Yeah, early 90s.
I had forgotten how fucking batshit that movie is.
Motherfucking crazy.
Christopher Walken was the perfect person.
Yeah.
I don't know what he's doing in that movie.
How dare you?
It's bizarre. But the whole anal probe scene is worth the price of admission all by itself. Just his calm yet indignant reaction, just thinking about it makes me fucking crack up.
The Electrolux vacuum cleaner hose comes out of the wall. It goes up.
It's so booty. Handy. It's like they had the anal probe thing. It's like right there. I think that was the funniest part of it.
How dare you?
After they stuck a vacuum cleaner up his butt.
Yeah.
I think I'd be a little more mad than that. I'm just saying. But I think the funniest part about that was the fact that they just had it super handy. Like
Mr.
it was just like
says,
popped out.
I like Flash Gordon, but it's no Star Wars. Exactly. There's no Star Wars. Flash Gordon was Star Wars when you're in full fucking hormonal rut as a young boy and smoking weed. That's what Flash Gordon is. You're under the effects of fucking weed and fucking testosterone. Yeah,
that's a deadly combination.
That's a deadly combination. Princess Aura, I was fucking floored by that. That shit was sexual to me. You know what I mean? It was like that shit was. It's just a great movie. They had BDSM in it. Not the ball worms. Yeah, we're gonna use the ball worms on you.
She's like, oh, I kind of like it.
Lesbian BDSM going on. Clytus fucking trying to cut a deal with fucking Emperor Ming for the hand of his daughter. Yeah, after you get done torturing her, I'll let you marry her. Okay, the thing. Yeah, yes, my lord. Fucking, this shit was creepy, man. Fuck, it was a creepy flick. I loved it. It was taboo. That whole movie was. But that was the idea behind fucking Flash Gordon. That was the whole thing. Is that Flash was an American. All right, he was pure of heart. He was a good person. So was Dale, and fucking the doctor. What was his name? Doctor fucking. Whatever his name was, the guy who made the rocket.
I know, I can't. Dr. Rocket.
The Mingos, or the Mingos, or the fucking Mongos, whatever you called them, were basically Europeans. They were fucking corrupt and fucking. They were sexually open people. You know, they weren't that cool.
Ooh,
and
we can't have that.
Can't have that. And they were also fighting and killing each other. And fucking,
you have to be all uptight.
They were a bunch of dictators. They were a bunch of dictators and shit. And so that was the meaning of fucking that was the meaning of Flash Gordon. It was very American perspective, commentary on the outside world, and then the good American Flash Gordon gets them to all agree and make peace with each other. That's just looking pie in the sky American mentality. We're gonna fix the world. That's what they're saying.
Good luck with that. But yeah.
Good luck.
That's what I just said.
Yeah.
Ben says what did I just say it was called? The Penagaglin or whatever. Was one of my nominations for the nastiest undead in D&D in a live stream a while ago. I mean, that monster is probably one of my favorite world monsters because it's just so what a fucked up idea. I mean, how would you even come up with that? Who came up with that? Like, I know somebody had to come up with it at some point. Like, I know that it was probably, I don't know. But I'm just fascinated by where myths come from. And I know it's not usually one person coming up with the shit, but it's just kind of like a conglomeration of a bunch of different stuff that's going on. But it's like, what situation would have brought that about? Like, we have a demon vampire creature whose head comes off, with all the stuff attached, and floats around with all of her little guts just hanging, and she goes around with this big long tongue and like sucks babies out of wombs. Who would come up with that? I mean, they came up with that. I mean, that's pretty kick-ass. That's pretty creative. So it's just kind of, that's a lot more creative than like shit we came up with. Like the first time I saw that in a movie, and I was like, what the fuck is happening right now? Oh my god. It's like, that's the craziest fucking thing I've ever seen. And then I was just kind of like, what would have made them think of that? Because the thing about it is that if you think about the myths behind, you know, vampires or werewolves or zombies or whatever, or witches, it's like, you can see how they got from point A to point B. Like, you can be like, okay, like, you know, the vampire legend. It's like, well, obviously, people didn't understand bodily decomposition. People didn't understand the germ theory of disease. And they didn't understand how tuberculosis spread or the plague spread or anything like that. And, you know, so that kind of, like, informed all of these stories. And you can totally see, if you put yourself in that mindset, you can totally see where that comes from. The thing about somebody's head popping off and floating around with all of their guts, their organs, like, hanging down from the neck, it's like, how? Like, what? How would you even think of that? I don't even know, like, how you would think of that. So, like I said, that's surely one of the most creative vampire monsters. That's for sure. So, yeah, there are still people that apparently still believe in vampires nowadays, and I'm not just talking about goths that think they're Visago or whatever. There are, like, some places, like, even in, like, Romania and stuff like that, where people still think, hey, the relatives still, you know, like, in kind of backwaters and whatnot.
Feeky showed up.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah,
I see that. But, yeah, so the shit is still happening. Also, Wikipedia categorizes the chupacabra as a sort of vampire-like creature.
Yeah.
Which I guess it is. That's marginal, because it's not a person. I mean, you know. A vampire is generally like a person, or it was a person. It's like a revenant. It's like an undead person. I kind of feel like if you're getting into animals, then you're getting into cryptid territory, and then you're expanding the definition of vampire to a point where it's meaningless. You know what I mean? I mean, yeah, the chupacabra in some legends does suck blood. I mean, isn't that what the name means? Goat sucker?
Yeah. Goat sucker.
So, you know what I mean? But I don't know if I would necessarily call that. It's vampiric, sure. But I don't know if I would necessarily, like, call that a vampire, you know? I don't really know. But yeah, let me see if there's anything else that I did not cover. Oh, I did want to cover this. Because I remember reading this being a big theory, and I think this came out, like, in the mid-'80s. Where, like, this dude who is a biochemist, his name was David Dolphin, of all things. And Dolphin, just like the animal. He came up with the idea, and I think it proliferated for quite a while, because I remember hearing a lot about this. That it could be that, because there was, like, a big rash, I feel like, in the 80s, for trying to come up with real things that might be behind certain myths and legends. So he proposed that maybe some of the vampire myths came from people that had porphyria.
Yeah, I heard of it.
But here's the thing, like, because he's like, yeah, people with that, they have, like, light sensitivity, and they get, like, you know, lesions on their skin, and, like, they their gums and their nails, like, recede, so it looks like red, or they look like they have fangs or something like that, and they try to, like, stay out of the sun because they're really sensitive to the sun and blah blah. So it kind of sounded reasonable on its face, and I remember hearing that and being like, oh yeah, that sounds reasonable. And I think it was even in some of my books. It might have been, they might have talked about it on, like, some documentaries and shit like that. But then, and I can't believe I didn't really think of this, but they're like, here's the problem, though. The vampire myth arose, you know, thousands of years ago. And originally, what we would consider as vampires were more like ghouls. They didn't look like what the fictional vampires look like nowadays, like super pale, staying out of the sun, all that kind of shit.
The lore had not existed
The
yet.
lore didn't exist yet, like when vampires were invented. So he was like trying to explain like the fictional vampire rather than the folkloric vampire, is what they were saying.
Another thing is those that people that were sick, that had things like porphyria, didn't survive back in the old days.
There's a cure for it now,
they
but
tended to die.
Yeah.
So I don't think that there would have been any legends built around them. They'd have been very rare. And people didn't really keep records as well as they do today. So you'd have seen a person who had a weird illness in a small area, a localized area, a little town. They'd have lived for a little while, then died and been forgotten. It wouldn't cause a lore.
Yeah, and like I said, all of the vampire lore had been established, prior to, and original vampires didn't look like the later.
Right.
The way we think of vampires nowadays, the way we thought of vampires in the 80s when he came up with that theory, was informed by pop culture. It was informed by novels and stuff like that. That wasn't what the folkloric vampire was like.
That's not what they were talking about.
That's not what they were talking about.
They were talking about basically a ghoul that came out of the ground.
Like I said, and I kind of think that probably came from people not understanding body decomposition and also how diseases spread.
Right.
Like various diseases.
People were dying of other fucking diseases and they couldn't see it. So it must have been something spiritual. They dig up a person that they suspected was doing it. And they say, hey, that motherfucker's not totally rotten. But they didn't know that a body could be preserved underneath the ground for quite a while. If the temperatures are right.
Yeah, I mean, it happens.
Yeah.
I mean, under certain circumstances, they've dug up bodies that were like, hundreds, thousands of years old that still, I mean, they didn't look like they were still alive, but they still looked pretty good. Still had skin and hair and shit like that. Just depends where you're at. Depends on the climate. Yeah. Generally. But have you ever read a book about those body farms? Where they do all the research. Well, they don't just leave them outside. They put them in all different kind of. They submerge some in the water. They put some in dry conditions, some in wet conditions. They just want to. They're just seeing like how, because for it's gross, but you can for crime forensics you can. I read like a couple of books about it, and it's disgusting, but it's like actually pretty fascinating. Like that and a lot of people donate their bodies to that because it helps forensic science.
There's photographs of a guy who died at sea in his own boat. And the boat was adrift for years, like 5 or 6 years. They found that boat. He was there dead at the damn dinner table. Or at the little table inside the living quarters of the ship. And he looked pretty intact. He was green, I think, but he looked... There wasn't anything to eat him. He was at sea. Yeah. You have maggots, I guess.
Yeah,
just kind of preserved out there.
I mean, if you were far enough out to sea, I guess flies couldn't get there.
Yeah. So. He dried out, so it became kind of like a green mummy.
So he's like jerky.
Yeah.
Human jerky.
That boat it's creepy shit. That boat was out there for years by itself.
See, that kind of stuff is like, that's creepy.
Yeah.
I don't know why it's creepy, it just is.
Yeah, it was a ghost ship.
Yeah, because all you can think of is just that dead body just floating around out there all that time.
It looked sinister.
But
it wasn't. He died of a heart attack.
That's what I mean. Like, if you think about it, it's not scary, but it's still. I think most people would still think that was creepy.
Yeah, it'd be very creepy if you found it. But he was just out fishing in his fishing boat,
and shit happened.
And he died of a heart attack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. They're talking about Cocaine Bear. Ben said, great film. When is the review coming out? We still need to see Cocaine Bear.
You haven't seen it yet, yeah.
Yeah, we still haven't seen it yet.
Well.
I do want to see it. Joseph said, David Drake wrote a story called The Red Lear about a were dinosaur.
A were dinosaur, yeah, okay.
Well, I guess the Velocipaster was kind of like a were dinosaur, wasn't it?
Velocipaster is one of the best movies ever made. That's cinematic gold. It sounds crazy.
It really is.
But you see it, you'll understand exactly.
But technically, isn't he a
I gotta have that shit on Blu-ray.
Isn't he a were dinosaur? He turns into a dinosaur.
Yeah, he is.
Like he shapeshifts into a... Yeah, so I guess technically he's a were dinosaur. Yeah, that works. But yes.
Chuck Tinkle wrote that shit.
Did I tell you guys that I don't remember if I told you. I know I told him. I was at the bookstore the other day, and I saw a novel by Chuck Tingle. Like an actual Dead Trees paper novel. Like it was a hardback. Yeah. I can't remember what it was called now. Camp something. It looked like a slasher. And I was like, now I kind of feel like I want to buy that. Just because pretty sure it's the same Chuck Tingle. But it wasn't erotica, and it didn't have any dinosaurs or gay airplanes.
Yeah, the author picture, was it him and a gee?
Oh, I didn't see it. I didn't look.
All right.
No, so if we go to the bookstore this weekend, I'll look.
All right.
I just saw it, like I happened to be looking for something else, and I was like, what the fuck? I thought he just wrote ebooks that were like,
I don't think it's the same guy.
It's gotta be. Who else has that name? Come on. You could probably, I don't know. All right, so so the porphyria thing, that was kind of debunked a little bit. Some people have also tried to maybe associate rabies, like maybe people that had rabies, that maybe that was something that kind of maybe informed the legend a little bit, which I guess sounds a little bit more plausible, but you know what I mean. I kind of feel like it's probably a lot simpler than that.
I don't think the medieval people were that observant. They just made up stories.
Although, I mean, what else was there for them to do, really?
They just made up stories.
That's true. I mean, it could be. Here's another fun fact that I learned. I feel like I kind of knew this fact before and then forgot it, but then I relearned it again. Is that, you know how, Dracula has the cape and everything nowadays? The cape only came about because when they were doing a stage production of Dracula, they thought it would be easier to make the character like disappear if he had like a big ass cape on. So that's why they put a big ass cape on him.
That was during the Bela Lugosi time, stage play?
Yeah, because the 1931 movie was not, it was based on the novel-ish, but it was actually based on a stage play that was based on the novel.
My understanding, the whole idea of a gentleman, aristocratic vampire that you're seeing was a Bela Lugosi thing.
No, I told you that came from The Vampire by John Polidori.
Yeah, but when he was doing fucking Dracula, he was dressed in that cape and that fucking, basically a damn tuxedo style uniform. And that's Bela Lugosi that came up with that. Yeah, it's me. He made that whole costume.
Well, he was reprising his stage role.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. On the stage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if he was the first actor to play Dracula, though.
Nope. Yeah.
On stage, I mean.
Right, that's not what I'm saying.
Right.
I'm saying that when you're thinking of Dracula, you're actually thinking of Bela Lugosi's stage act.
Which is crazy because, I mean, that movie came out, almost 100 years ago now, which is fucking insane to think about. Because we just watched the shit the other day. And people still watch it. But it's just kind of like if you tell somebody to do like a stereotypical vampire, they're doing Bela Lugosi.
They're doing Bela Lugosi.
They're doing Bela Lugosi.
Yeah.
Which is, I think he would, if he was still alive now, if he could somehow bring him back from the dead, like a vampire, and you could show him that, I think he'd think that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Although I think Bram Stoker. Right?
Stoker.
Bram Stoker. That's what I said.
Stoker, not Stoker.
I'm gonna say what I'm fucking drunk. Fucking...
Not like stroke.
Okay, look,
Bram
that
Stoker
dude that
ace.
wrote the fucking book. He's really talking about Max Schreck, though. I think.
See, I kind of feel
He's
like
not talking about Bela Lugosi. He's talking about Max Schreck.
Yeah, I mean, in the book,
yeah, it doesn't.
He looks like an old man, like a rat-like old man.
Yeah. So he's not talking about Bela Lugosi. He's talking about Max Schreck.
Now he does get younger. Like he looks younger when they see him later. Like after he starts snacking on everybody in England.
Yeah.
Like as he's getting kind of his power back. Because I think the implication in the book was that was why he was looking like a wizened old man, was because he was running out of people to snack on, like where he lived, and that's why he needed to go to London, because that's where because that's where he was draining them all dry around there. So he's like, well, I need to go somewhere there's like a high population density, so there's more people for me to like snack on. So that's why he went. But it's like over the course, so they did kind of get that right in the Francis Ford Coppola one, where he looked kind of like an old man at the beginning, but then like he got younger like as he went. You know what I mean? He did mention that in the book, that like when they see him in England, he looks younger. Like you can still tell it's the same dude, but he looks younger. But yeah, when Jonathan Harker first gets to the castle, he looks like a yucky, like a... Not quite as bad as Nosferatu. Like, he didn't look like a monster, but he looked like kind of a yucky old man. Like, So that's, so the whole Bela Lugosi thing where he's all, like, kind of young and suave and everything, that's a fiction only. That's from the movies. That's not from the book.
I still think the Max Schreck image is closer to what they're talking about, because...
It is closer.
What Stoker's talking about is a fucking Strigoi. He's rebooting the Strigoi, which the Strigoi looked like a fucking rat. It looked like fucking Max Schreck. Max Schreck's Nosferatu character. I think that's probably what they're talking about. But it doesn't matter.
We just watched the original Nosferatu again the other day, and it's like, and because we had just watched Shadow of the Vampire again not too long ago, and I was like, I kind of want to watch the original Nosferatu again because I haven't seen it in a long time. And Max Schreck still looks creepy as shit in that fucking movie.
The Stephen King's television version of fucking Salem's Lot. That
Toby
version
Hooper.
of Mr. Barlow is probably what Bram Stoker's talking about.
I really
Mr.
like
Barlow is what he's talking about.
I really like Kurt Barlow in that. Like, he looks really cool.
Yeah.
That's Reggie Nalder, by the way, playing him.
Yeah.
He was in an episode of Thriller that I just watched the other day. And I was like, hey, it's Mr. Barlow. In a completely different, he's playing a human, obviously.
I got that shit on Blu-ray too.
Salem's Lot, it's like...
It's a good program.
That's a really good adaptation.
Yeah.
That's a really good adaptation.
It's made for TV.
But like I said, it's
good.
Toby Hooper.
It's real good,
he made fucking Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Life Force.
Yeah, it's real good.
And The Funhouse. He knows what he's doing. And also maybe Poltergeist, although there's like argument over whether Steven Spielberg directed that or Toby Hooper did. So you know what I mean? So there's that whole argument. But yeah. I don't think I mentioned Varney the Vampire, but that was another kind of early. That was a Penny Dreadful. That was another thing that kind of informed. But I don't think it was quite as influential. Like I said, The Vampire by John Polidori, which was based on Lord Byron, because Polidori was Byron's physician, was kind of the first to introduce a lot of the tropes that we would recognize in the sense of Dracula as an aristocratic character instead of like a ghoul-type monster. So there was that. Then, like I said, there was Sheridan Le Fanu, who wrote Carmilla. That came out in 1872, like way before Dracula. And that introduced kind of like the lesbian vampire angle. Also very good. And then Dracula came out in 1897, which kind of like cemented all of the stuff that we know about vampires nowadays, which, like I said, most of which comes from the books and the movies. It doesn't necessarily come from folklore, other than a few things like steaks and garlic and, maybe mirrors in some cultures, but, and crosses and stuff. But it's most of the stuff like about vampires having to be invited in, or like them turning into bats, or the fangs, or things like that, them being gaunt and pale and not being able to go out in the sunlight and stuff like that. That was all like later. That all came from the books and the movies. So yeah. All right, so let's start talking about werewolves before it gets too late, because like I said, I got to get up very early in the morning, so I don't want to go on all night, but this is a fun topic, you know what I mean? I don't know quite as much on werewolves because there's, like I said, there's a lot of vampire werewolf crossover, and I think kind of the same thing happened with werewolves as happened with vampires, in the sense that a lot of the shit that we know about werewolves, like if you ask anybody about werewolves nowadays, everybody say, oh, silver bullet, and it kind of looks like a dude and a wolf like hybrid and stuff like that. Most of that was from the shit about the full moon and all that. Almost all of that was from the movies. And in a sense, I think a lot of that came from The Wolfman, the 1941 movie with Lon Chaney. Well, Lon Chaney was in there, right? Yeah. So yeah, that's all that stuff kind of came from that. And just like the vampire legend, in the original stories, you didn't have to get bitten by a werewolf or attacked by a werewolf to become a werewolf. It was usually a similar kind of thing to like a vampire, where it actually in the earliest stories, becoming a werewolf was like a punishment, usually from one of the gods. Like you did something to piss off one of the gods, and they turned you into a werewolf like as punishment. So there was that. So I kind of feel like the whole thing about just turn it into it like every full moon or something like that, that's a pretty modern concept, because a lot of the old stories were not like that. But even going back to ancient times, and I feel like the werewolf legend is not as... I don't think the vampire legend is all that weird, but the werewolf legend is considerably less weird, because you can see a through line as to why humans would have come up with that, and why cultures all over the world have stories about people turning into predatory animals, and it's usually whatever animals are predatory in their particular area, that they're from. So it's just kind of like, in South America or Central America or whatever, it's like they have were jaguars, and it's like in Africa or whatever, they would have like were lions or were crocodiles or whatever, and then like in India they would have like were tigers. I mean, so it was whatever kind of the apex predator in your area was. They had stories about people that could turn into those.
Yeah, the islanders, like Hawaiians, Polynesians, they had stories about fucking tubarão, sharks. Sharks. And I think they had kind of things that were kind of like were sharks.
Wouldn't that be cool, being a were shark?
I don't remember how the story exactly went, but it's about people turning into sharks. So a hero guys turning into sharks.
I had heard about that. Yeah. That's kind of a Polynesian.
Yeah, it's by Polynesian. Yeah.
So here's the thing. Would you rather be, like, given the choice, would you rather be a vampire or a werewolf?
I'd rather be a vampire.
You think?
Probably.
I probably would too, because I like the immortality thing.
Yeah.
Even though, like I said, I'm pretty sure immortality was a later construct as well. I don't think that the original ghouls or anything like that were.
I don't think it's mentioned if werewolves were immortal.
No, I don't think they are. I think they're just regular. But the thing about it is that being a vampire would be super cool, but like in some ways it would be a super pain in the ass too. So in that way, like being a werewolf would probably be like a lot, at least in the modern concept of it, would probably be a lot less of a pain in the ass, because it's just kind of like, oh, it's the full moon, I'm going to turn into a wolf for a couple of days or whatever and run around and like kill deer or whatever.
Werewolf
but then you could be like a normal person the rest of the time.
Werewolf would be about live fast, die young, I think, and fucking vampire would be like more about fucking slow down and try to live for as long as you can.
So it's like a sprint versus a marathon.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I guess it would like depend on the kind of person you were.
Right.
I kind of like, because I was saying this while you were gone. It's like, even though I feel like people have tried harder to explain the origins of the vampire because it doesn't seem quite as obvious, I don't feel like you need to go too far to explain the origin of werewolves or whatever predator is in the area, because every culture has these kind of, I mean, we are animals, we evolve from animals. We compete with animals for food, not so much nowadays, but back in the day we did. So we're part of the natural world, so there's going to be stories about you becoming the apex predator and particularly in cultures where you are competing with wolves for the same food source, essentially, which a lot of times they were. You're gonna identify with that predator because you were also a predator. So you're gonna be like, oh, well, this predator, he maybe is better at it than me, so I'm going to kill the wolf and wear his skin, and that'll give me his essence. So it's like, to me, that seems not as weird. You know what I mean? Because we're just animals, and
the werewolf stories are about bestialism.
Yeah.
Basically. It is about carnal lust.
And there's a reason why throughout history, most of the werewolves that you hear about, most of the legends about werewolves are almost always men. Yeah. There have been some female werewolves, but not that many. I mean, recently there have been too, like in movies and stuff, like Ginger Snaps and stuff. Yeah, but because I like that they kind of tied the whole werewolf thing in with menstruation, because the cycles of the moon and all that kind of stuff, which I thought was a good idea. But prior to that, I feel like it's almost kind of like a Jekyll and Hyde thing, where it's because you have all of these primal urges. And people have these fantasies about just like letting them out and just being an animal and not worrying about. So, like I said, that's not weird to me.
Werewolf story is a man as beast story.
Yeah.
Man embracing his bestial nature.
Yeah, that's exactly what that is. So, like I said, I feel like it needs less explanation.
You're right, yeah.
Because it's something that a lot of people, and honestly, I don't know about now, but I know that one of the top categories of erotica, at least a written erotica, is werewolf type stories, or beast on, like Beauty and the Beast type stories. You know what I mean? A lot of people really like those. Like, it's a huge subgenre. It's a huge subgenre.
I mean, being with a guy he's hot as a motherfucker, he's fucking he's handsome, but he's powerful, but he's fucking bestial. All right, and now you have to have sex with him. That's what they're talking about.
Oh no.
Oh no.
He's so furry.
He's not quite human. He can beat up any other man. He's dominant as shit.
It's all
but you want to surrender to him.
It's almost kind of like the ultimate bad boy.
Yeah, ultimate bad boy
type story. It's like he's an actual animal.
Right.
But he can also like
can talk to you.
Well, there's different versions. Like I said, it's these, because this is mythology. It's like kind of hard to pin down because some versions, particularly like the really old, like the ancient versions of the stories, like you just turn into a wolf and you're just essentially a wolf. Like you don't retain any of your human characteristics. Where I kind of feel like in more modern iterations of it, it's more of a man-wolf hybrid, which is kind of more a new thing.
Yeah.
And he does seem to retain some of his human faculties. Whereas back in the day, I think it was just you turned into a wolf and you just turned into a beast and you didn't know what you were doing.
There's a lot of CGI porn of this. Fucking hot women with these fucking werewolves like something out of the Howling. He's got a human shape, but he looks like a wolf. It's just symbolic.
He sent me this thing on Facebook the other day.
It's just symbolic.
It was animated, like CGI, and it was funny because almost like a repeating GIF. Yeah, but it was just kind of like a werewolf like fucking a human. Let's like don't put it on the screen because we'll get demonetized.
I don't think it'll get tagged. She's not fucking it.
It'll get tagged.
You think so?
It'll get tagged.
Let's see if I have a...
Ben says lycanthropy jumps between humans and local fauna. Yeah, and that's the thing. I kind of feel like I said, I feel like there's not as much to explain here, but so. It's just kind of see you're gonna get tagged. And we just got demonetized.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. Well, you don't think so?
I don't think so. You think we did?
Yeah.
It's that good.
Almost all of our shit gets demonetized. You know that, right?
It's that good at recognizing it.
Yeah.
Damn.
I mean, I like pretty much 75% of our stuff gets demonetized because of like shit you say and shit you show on there.
The shit I say and the shit I show.
So you say,
what is it that I say?
I think that they
What
won't.
Is it that I say that gets it?
Well, like, because when we start talking about like porn and all that other kind of stuff, and so, you know what I mean? So we usually get demonetized.
Fuck them then.
But I'm just...
We ought to be on... I'm telling you, we ought to take the show to Rumble because they won't censor it.
I need more ice.
Yeah, here. If we take the show to Rumble, we'd be able to fucking have a clean show all through it. They don't care.
Jen says werewolf for me. I kind of... Yeah, that's the thing. I think I'd probably rather be a vampire because I want to live forever and that would be really cool. But werewolf, like I said, seemed like it would be cooler because it would be like a lot less fuss. You know what I mean? Like, you could live as a regular person, but then like every now and then you'd be like, oops, gotta go do my werewolf shit. You know what I mean? But I don't know. Like I said, there's no hard and fast rule over, like nowadays everybody knows, oh, vampires are immortal. Although, like I said, that's a modern construction. But werewolves, I kind of feel like it's all over the place. Like someone might think they're just like regular people that can turn into wolves, and I don't know if they necessarily live forever or not. I'm sure in some mythologies they do. But that's the thing. You can do kind of anything with it nowadays. So, as I mentioned before, we were talking about the first references to werewolves. There is actually a reference to a werewolf in the Epic of Gilgamesh. In the sense that, and this is going back to what I said before, where werewolves, usually the story of a werewolf, like from ancient times, it was almost always, becoming a werewolf was almost always a punishment from a god. Like you did something to piss a god off and they turned you into a wolf. You know what I mean? And it wasn't a good thing. So in the Epic of Gilgamesh, he actually, like Ishtar, who is the goddess, she like comes on to him and he's like, nah. And so basically, so that happens. And he doesn't want to fuck her because she was an asshole to another boyfriend that she had, who was a shepherd. Like, she turned him into a wolf, right? And then made him eat all his own sheep, which is kind of a dick move. So there's that. So like I said, it was kind of like a punishment, but it was mentioned in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is how many fucking years old? 3,000 years old? Something like that. But it's like, it's the oldest written story.
Older than Bible stuff.
Way older.
Yeah.
So yeah, but there is a mention of somebody getting, like a man getting turned into a wolf in that, which, like I said, you would consider a werewolf. Now, there's also a mention in the Metamorphoses by Ovid, and this is probably one of the most famous, like, ancient werewolf stories. So there's this traveler. He goes to King Lycaon of Acadia or Arcadia. I've seen it both ways. Now, Lycaon suspects that this visitor is a god. I've seen versions where it's Zeus or Jupiter, which is kind of the same thing. So he says, I'm going to do a trick on this god for whatever reason. I'm going to serve him human meat and see if he realizes that it's human meat. In some versions of the story, he just, like, plucks some random motherfucker and cooks him. And in other versions of the story, he actually cooks his own son, which seems a little far to go to pull a prank on Zeus, but okay. So he does that, and Zeus, Jupiter, whoever the god is, like, obviously is a god, so knows immediately that this is human meat, and this is a pretty fucked up thing to be doing, dude. So he turns Lycaon into a wolf. So again, punishment by a god. That was kind of like all the earliest references to werewolves were always punishment by a god. There was no there was no thing about, like, being bitten by a werewolf and then turning into a werewolf, like, later on. Now, interestingly, so King Lycaon, that's where the word lycanthropy came from, obviously. Now, originally, the word lycanthropy referred not necessarily to a person that could turn into a wolf, but it referred to what nowadays we would call a mental illness, about somebody who thought they could turn into a wolf, but it was like a delusion. You know what I mean? Because that is a thing still nowadays. And they still call it that, too, as far as I know. I don't know if they have, like, a more modern name for it, but they do still call it that. Where you don't actually turn into a wolf, obviously, but you think that you do. It's a delusion that you turn into a wolf and, like, start acting all wolfy and shit like that. So that's still what they call it. So those were actually, like, the first uses of that word actually referred to somebody with a delusion. It didn't refer to somebody that actually, like, turned into a wolf. So yeah. So let me see where I was with the notes. I lost my place. But yeah, so, excuse me. So as I mentioned before, all cultures have stories of, you know, like I said, wherever you live, whatever the apex predator is, whatever the main predator was that was competing with humans for the same food source, is usually the source of whatever the werewolf or wereleopard or weretiger or whatever the legend is. Obviously, also Native American circles, you had the skinwalker, which is kind of a similar sort of thing. They had their own kind of stories about that, which is kind of similar. People that could change into various animals. So like I said, I kind of feel like the whole modern conception of a werewolf being a wolf-man hybrid, and that's actually kind of what the word werewolf means. It just means man-wolf. But pretty much, unless I'm mistaken, all of the earlier stories about werewolves were all about a person being turned into an actual wolf. Now, whether they still had some semblance of human consciousness, that kind of varied. But in all of the old stories that I'm aware of, the human just turned into a wolf. It wasn't like a combo of a human and a wolf. You know what I'm saying? So as I mentioned, I kind of feel like because it was considered punishment at the beginning, and then later on it was kind of crossbred with witchcraft, people that practice witchcraft during their life, or did various things like that. Like sometimes they would become werewolves as well. Or if you were just like a shitty person. Also, I kind of feel like there was a conception that, and this happened in a few cases, there was a guy in, I think it was in Germany, whose name was Peter Stubb or Stube or Stump, who was essentially, well, allegedly, I don't really know, because it was back in the old days when they would torture you, and they would, you know, and if you torture somebody, they'll say all kind of crazy shit. So yeah, he's like, oh my god, I totally turned into a wolf and like ate my family and all this other kind of shit. So so I don't know if he really did the stuff or not. But so it could be too that people who were particularly egregious serial killers back in the old days, like back in the medieval, like ancient to medieval times, people didn't have a concept of a serial killer, I guess. So they thought to themselves, well, anybody that's doing anything that fucked up can't be an entire person, so there must be something wrong with them. There must be some kind of like animalistic something or other. So I do kind of feel like the concept of the werewolf was also kind of cross-pollinated with nowadays what we would call a serial killer. Like if like there was a bunch of fucked up murders happening somewhere and people said like, well, a human couldn't possibly be doing this, so it has to be some kind of beast, and then that would, you know, and then it would follow that this is a person that can like turn into a beast and it's doing all of this kind of fucked up shit. So there's that kind of shit too. But I kind of feel like where people that turned into werewolves, it was usually through bad behavior, and it was usually something that it was usually like some kind of sexual bad behavior. You know what I mean? Like they were really promiscuous, or they were rapists or something like that. They would get accused of being werewolves because werewolves were seen as like these hypersexual, overtly masculine. Like I said, until very recent times, I kind of feel like almost all werewolf stories were men.
It should be.
Were men, as it should be.
Well, there were some serial killers that thought back in the
that's what I was just talking about.
1400s that thought they were werewolves.
That's what I was just talking about.
Yeah, you talking about him. He was like a fucking. He was out there in the middle of nowhere with his sister that they grew up together. Remember that? And they had all the kids together, and he was going out killing women on the countryside and eating parts of them.
Yeah.
Thought he was a werewolf.
Yeah.
But he wasn't, though. But they killed them all on the wheel, though. I think he even killed the children on the wheel, didn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. Weird. Being broken on the wheels.
I mean, they didn't play it back then.
They didn't play it back then.
Even if you were just kind of like associated with, if somebody just like whispered demon in your direction, they're like, well, that's the thumb screws for you.
I think that dude and his sister, though, I think they would probably fall under the category of being feral.
The thing about it,
they
though,
didn't know anybody except that old man that raised them.
Because what I was just talking about, in the sense that werewolves and serial killers were almost kind of like, because like I said, they didn't really have a concept of serial killers back then in the way that we do now.
Yeah.
So that might have kind of like played into the werewolf thing too. But I kind of feel like you can't really take anything, because like the case of Peter Stump, who, you know, confessed to being a werewolf and doing all this witchcraft and stuff like that, but he confessed to all that stuff under torture.
Yeah.
So I kind of feel like all of this kind of splashy, fucked up shit that all these people said that they did back in those old days, it's like, yeah, but were you pulling their toenails out at the time that they said? Because people will say anything to like avoid that kind of shit.
The guy I was talking about didn't do that under torture. He confessed openly.
Yeah, that must be a different dude.
He was a different guy. Said he and his sister were raised by an old man out in the damn cottage. Remember that guy? Remember that case? I think it was
Vaguely,
1400s. Yeah. He said he didn't remember who his parents were, but he and his sister were raised by an old man who did read the Bible to him and did stuff. And then he died. And he died when they were like 10. And then they raised each other out in that little cottage out in the middle of nowhere. And they had kids together. And by the time he was about 17 or 18, I think, he was going around killing people because he thought he was a werewolf. They kept finding half dead women that were girls that were mauled. You could see they had bite marks all over them and partly eaten.
Well, like I said,
it down to him, and he said he was a werewolf and told his whole life story to him. and then they killed him and his sister and their children. They broke him on the wheel.
But like I said, that is an actual mental illness, which
Yeah.
is actually called lycanthropy, where people don't actually transform into wolves, but they think that they do.
Yeah.
They do genuinely think that they do, and
Yeah.
they go out and do wolfy shit, but they don't realize that they're not actually turning into wolves.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's a delusion. So, here's another interesting, and I'm not really sure what the origin of this was, but there's a lot of werewolf stories, particularly coming out of Germany and that region, where people are werewolves, and they can become werewolves pretty much wherever they want because they have like a magic. This is gonna sound stupid. A magic belt, essentially, or like a magic piece of clothing. It's usually a belt, or like a little. It's usually made out of wolf skin or fur or something like that, and they can put it on, and then they'll turn into a werewolf. Problem is that if you destroy the belt while they're a wolf, then they can't change back to a person. So there's like a bunch of folk tales, particularly coming out of Germany, where, you know, there's werewolves and they're like, hey, I'm going to be a werewolf today. So they put their special werewolf belt on, and they go around and run out and kill deer or whatever. And then somebody is like, hee hee, and then like they take their belt away and like fucking destroy it so you can't.
Ben is mentioning berserkers.
I was just actually that was
Yeah.
my next paragraph.
Yeah. They were like wolf clans. If you watch that movie, what was that? Amaleth. What was that? What was that story of Amaleth? What was it called? The Norseman.
Yeah.
A great movie.
Yeah, I love that movie.
Great movie. It's where Hamlet was based on. Shakespeare's Hamlet was based on this story. And Prince Amaleth was a berserker, a bizarker. He's going bizarre. They were kind of like,
Which they did wolves, but they did bears too.
yeah, any kind of weird
Like I
animal.
said, any kind of like big like predator. They're
Yeah,
good.
they were warrior cults. They'd take a bunch of fucking drugs and fucking start chanting and working themselves up into a frenzy. There a bunch of rites of passage that they did, and then after that they kind of became packs of mercenaries that Vikings would use as like shock troops.
Because it was probably pretty scary seeing like a whole bunch of big burly dudes running at you in fucking wolf and bear skins.
Yeah, they were nude mostly.
Yeah,
Nude with fucking animal heads.
And a lot of times they would like paint their skin black
Yeah.
and like all of that. They wanted to look like as terrifying as possible. So it was like psychological warfare.
Yeah, they didn't care if they got killed or not. They were totally disregarded their own safety.
Yeah.
The Romans talked about them, even though they weren't talking about those particular ones. The Romans said that there were a lot of people of the Germanic tribes that were like that. They would attack you while they were nude in animal costumes, and they were fierce. And they used large steel swords, hand-forged steel swords. This is in a time when the Roman armies just used bronze still. You know, the so-called barbarians were not primitive. They just weren't Romans. The Romans called them barbarians, but they were.
Well, of course they were gonna call them that.
Yeah, they had good weapons technology. They could make steel. They also had saddles on horses with stirrups. Romans didn't have that. They were just wild. They were just more fierce. They weren't dumb, though.
Mr. 88 said Trick or Treat, the movie, has a whole pride of female werewolves. Yeah, that's right. But like I said, female werewolves is a pretty modern construction. I think there were like a couple of them like sprinkled in the ancient stories, but like 99% of the old werewolf stories, there was always men.
That's a sexy concept, though. Like, you're a regular dude, and these women are gonna come and they're gonna fuck you. You don't even have a choice.
Now I have heard of like stories, because like I said, there's a lot of
they better be hot. And in
there's
the
a
movies,
lot
they are
of
hot.
there's a lot of crossover between
Yeah.
werewolfery and witchcraft.
Yeah.
Because they were kind of seen. They weren't seen as the same thing, but werewolfery was considered like one thing that like witches would do. You know what I mean? That was something that you could get accused of at witch trials, and there were werewolf trials as well. People accused of being werewolves and also other kind of witchcraft. But I do kind of feel like werewolves were genuinely seen as a very masculine type of monster. I do kind of feel like witches, because you did get some cases of like witches, like folklore about witches shape-shifting, but I feel like they didn't usually shapeshift. Female witches didn't usually shapeshift into wolves, though, did they?
No.
I kind of feel like they shapeshifted into like other animals. Like I said, I read like an old story a long time ago about a woman that was a witch, but she shapeshifted into a big cat.
Yeah, cats, rabbits.
Cats are seen as like more feminine, I guess.
Cats, rabbits, foxes, things like that.
That kind of shit. I kind of feel because they're smaller, they're still predators, but they're not as badass as wolves, I guess. I don't know what it is, but yeah, so it's weird because I do kind of feel like, and it's now we're getting back to serial killers again, but I do kind of feel a lot of serial killers, and I think even BTK said this outright because he started strangling cats when he was a kid, which should have just like snuffed him out right then.
Yeah.
I mean, just let's save everyone in some trouble. But because people with that mentality, serial killers, they tend to see cats as more feminine animals for whatever reason.
Well, they scream like women. That's what they said.
Yeah, he did say that.
Yeah, they scream like women.
But I don't know if that's entirely it, though. I do kind of feel like, and I feel like this is, it's you know, it's not like it used to be, but I do kind of feel like people have a sense of wolves and dogs as more masculine animals, even though obviously wolves and dogs can be male or female.
Yeah.
But they always think of cats as like more feminine animals.
Yeah.
For whatever reason. And shit, man, even Cat People, the Val Lewton movie from the 40s, that had a Serbian woman, Irina, turning into a panther. So she was a werewolf, but she was a werepanther. Whenever she got sexually aroused, she turned into a werepanther. That came out in the 40s, you guys. They danced around it, but you could like pretty much...
They danced around lesbianism too in that movie.
It was
a good movie.
Honestly, I'm gonna argue. I think that was one of the best, if not the best, horror movies of the 40s.
Classy. Very classy.
I really, really like that movie. I liked all of Val Lewton's movies, but Cat People, I think, is my favorite. But yeah, so again, you have the werewolf thing. She's a werewolf, but she turns into a panther. She turns into a cat. So I kind of feel like that's interesting that it's like this whole male-female dynamic. And there's like, the more I looked into the history, I'm just like, yeah, pretty much all the old werewolf stories, it's all dudes. Like almost all dudes. So the funny thing about it is that, so they have a thing, so there's a whole subgenre of werewolf stories where dudes have a special werewolf belt. And I guess they can just put it on whenever they want to werewolf out, right? They're just like, I'm going to go have some werewolf times. And they go out in the woods and they just put the belt on. So they can do it whenever they want to. But then there's another subgenre of stories where the dudes, and this is a pretty common story too, where the dudes can also turn into werewolves whenever they want, but they have to go out in the woods and then they have to take all their clothes off. And they're like, okay, I'm going to wolf out now. But the thing about it is that if they can't get back to their clothes, because here's another common thing. They take off all their clothes. They go to the woods when they want to wolf out. They take off all their clothes. The clothes turn into stone for reasons. And then they'll pee around them.
Yeah.
Like to keep people away, I'm guessing. Yeah. To keep people from taking them.
Like animals.
And then they run up, and then they run off and like do their werewolfery business. And then they come out, and then the clothes magically turn back into clothes again, and they put them back on, and then they're just normal. So there's a bunch of different stories. Probably the most famous of these is, what's it called? It's called Bisclavret, something like that. So it's like this long poem, like a love poem. And it's a similar story to that, where it's a dude and he's a werewolf, and he goes out, and his wife, who's fucking around on him with some other chode, and she finds out he's a werewolf because they follow him one day. And so they go out in the woods, and they see him do the whole ritual. He takes off the clothes, he pees around him, the clothes turn into stone, blah-de-blah, and then he runs off and be's a werewolf. And she's like, ooh, this is an opportunity. So she decides her and her boyfriend are gonna fuck him over. So they take his clothes away so he can't turn back into a human. You know what I mean? But it ends up, so he stays a wolf, but then there's this whole thing where it's like, the king comes out in the woods, and like he goes up to him as a wolf, and he's just like, and the king is his buddy, so he's like, oh hey, it's you, and he like licks his face or something like that. So the king like recognizes him, so he ends up figuring out that like the wife fucked him over, and it's like this whole thing. So I think like the wife and the lover get killed or something like that. But it's like there's a whole small subgenre of folklore where dudes who are werewolves like their wives fucked them over by taking their clothes away so they can't turn back into human again. So it's like, this is fucking women again, taking your clothes away so you have to stay a wolf forever. You can't just run around and be a wolf. You have to, yeah, so there's like a bunch of that. So, like I said, the whole thing about getting bit by a wolf and that turns you into a werewolf, I'm pretty sure that's a very, very modern idea. And I think the whole full moon thing is a pretty modern idea too. That might have come from the Universal movie from 1941, as did the whole silver bullet thing. Now, I will concede that for whatever reason, silver has always been seen as effective against lots of supernatural creatures. Like I said, not just werewolves, but vampires and stuff too. But specifically a silver bullet, I think that's like a pretty modern... That might be from the 1941 movie. I don't know if there was an earlier reference to it that came from that. But just like everything else, a lot of the stuff that we know about werewolves is like pretty much from the movies, like not so much from the thing. And I think too, the Wolfman from 1941 might have been the first time that you saw... I don't know about the first time, but the first time, like, the first kind of big cultural thing where it was, like, a half man, half wolf. Because he was, like, still a dude, but he just had, like, a wolf face. And I think they probably just did that because that was cheaper. It's, you know, cheaper than, like, doing the whole wolf transforming thing like they did later on. Because I kind of feel like in a lot of the werewolf stories, like, where you see a werewolf movie nowadays, and you want to see the transformation scene, right? That's kind of like the big centerpiece of any, like, look at American Werewolf in London or anything, or The Howling, or anything like that. You want to see the person changing into a wolf. But I kind of feel like that wasn't as important back in the old days. You know what I'm saying? Like, they were just concerned about, yeah, the dude turned into a wolf, it was like magical or whatever, but they didn't really like focus on it. It was kind of more...
They didn't have special effects.
That's what I'm saying. And I kind of feel like the whole man-wolf hybrid came about almost kind of like out of necessity, because back in the 1940s when they made the Wolfman movie, they didn't have the effects to, you know, they just had to do everything through dissolves. Yeah. And so it was mostly just his face and his hands. They just like put fur on his hands, stuff like that. So like I said, it was cheaper. You know, and it's easier to just make him look like, you know, 99% like a dude, but just like with a wolfy face and hands. Much easier than doing what they did in American Werewolf in London, where they actually showed him turning into a wolf and it like looking super painful and everything, which still looks good, I think. Like, I don't know if that's just because I'm old. Like, I don't know if...
No, most people think that the old practical effects was the way to go.
I mean, that looks really good. I still think that looks really good. You know what I mean? That transformation. I think that's probably still the best transformation. Because nowadays they just do it with CGI, and that always looks like ass. But that was all done... That was all done with practical effects. That was all done with bladders and, like, that they put under the skin and, like, all this other kind of stuff, like, under fake skin. And it looks fantastic, I think. I just saw that movie again, like, a year ago, and I still think it looks good. And like I said, I don't know if that's just because I'm old or what. But... there's that whole thing. But yeah, I kind of feel like the more modern conception, and this comes from the Universal movies as well, is that you kind of have, because in the Wolfman, Larry Talbot, the main character, you know, he's a nice guy, he's a sympathetic protagonist. He gets bitten by a wolf, like no fault of his own, and ends up becoming a werewolf, and it's this big like existential crisis because like, oh, now I'm turning into a monster, like, I mean, I can't help it. You know what I mean? Whereas prior to that, I kind of feel like you were either, yeah, it was a curse, like, early, but then, like, there was a whole thing through the medieval period where you could just, like, choose to be a werewolf. Like, it's like, I'm going to go let off some steam or whatever. So it was, like, a whole different thing. But it's like, then it kind of went back in the direction of, you know, you just got bit by a wolf. And that happened in American Werewolf in London, too. Like, they were just out hiking, and, like, the one dude got killed, and then, like, the other dude didn't get killed. He got bit, but then he started turning into a werewolf. And then he had, like, this whole, like, fucking crisis about it, because it's like, now you're turning into a werewolf, and you're killing people, you know, you're killing innocent people, and you're not being aware of it. So it's kind of, like, a curse in that way, too. But I kind of feel like now, like, in later media, you kind of see more of a thing where people can choose to be a werewolf. Because after the Wolfman came out, I kind of feel like there were several decades where it just happened during the full moon, whether you wanted it to or not. And Ginger Snaps did that too. But I feel like nowadays it's kind of more like, oh, I can just wolf out whenever I want to wolf out, or I wolf out when I get mad or something like that. So it's much more flexible, I guess. Like less like a curse and more like, oh, well, just like a thing I do or a thing that happens when my emotions get the best of me or shit like that. You know what I mean? Which, I don't know. It's just kind of interesting the way the mythology like changes over time is what I'm saying. So, wait a minute. What time is it? Oh, shit. It's getting really, really late. Should we, like, wrap this up, probably?
Yeah, go ahead.
I kind of feel like...
Right.
We covered it. I mean, we pretty much covered it.
Yeah.
I didn't have, like, much more to cover, and I feel like it's getting really late, and I have to, like, go to sleep soon.
Yeah. If you really want to experience being a werewolf, go ahead and shoot up a bunch of trend balloon. You'd be like me.
Yeah, let's talk about... Somebody sent me a message earlier.
Yeah.
Somebody sent me a message earlier.
Yeah.
Or it was a comment on one of our sidetracks videos. Yeah. And said that we should do a trend stories video.
Stories? Yeah, we can do trend stories.
And I mean, it is kind of like...
It's like being a werewolf.
Kind of.
I even fucking... After going through my trend ordeal, 5 months being on trend... I even got like werewolf motif, Viking werewolf motif jewelry. So yeah, I was a werewolf. I was a werewolf for fucking 3 months, 2 months, out of that 5 months. You fight everybody. You want to fuck everybody. You want to kill everybody. It's just fucking bizarre. Now, not everybody on trend does that.
But you sure
did.
But
it tends to be like that. Yeah, some guys can take it and they can resist it pretty well. A lot of guys just take it, it fucks them up, and they love it. Like my friend in gay porn, like I was telling you about. Daniel, fucking, he loves trend. But he's going to fuck some twinks, all right? And he's going to try to make money with that somehow. He's just...
Well, I mean, that's kind of his job, though. Yeah. So that's okay.
Yeah, he's just
but I'm just saying,
old fucking huge bodybuilder who fucks twinks. And he's mean about it. You know,
but that's what they're paying him
That's
for.
what he does. Yeah, he's a werewolf. But no, I went through the werewolf thing. It calls me. I want to go back to it, but it's just nah.
Well, because
eventually somebody will kill you.
And what I told him is that, you know, the hell of it is that you being on it are having a great time.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, everybody else around you is having a horrible, miserable time.
Yeah.
So,
You're walking on eggshells.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's what I told you later. Like, I didn't want to tell you at the time because you might have shot me in the face. But, you know what I mean?
No, it'd have been something with my hands or something. Because
that's what I mean.
You're very fast and you're very strong on it. You're very volatile. And you're very animalistic on that shit. 1 for 1, milligram per milligram, trend is 5 times more powerful than testosterone, and you're taking quite a bit of it. And whenever I see these werewolf movies, you know, like fucking, you know, what's his name, Jack Nicholson with fucking Wolf, that movie, it's like, yeah, that's it. That's trend. Trend is also Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, though. Mr. Hyde, that's also trend. It's also the Goblin, fucking where Osborne fucking takes his fucking combat. What was it called? Combat fucking performance enhancing steroids, and that's what that shit's like. I don't recommend trend. I won't be going back to that. You take it and you like it.
Much as you want to.
Yeah, you take it, you like it, you start taking more of it.
But I will have to go stay in a hotel.
Yeah, and you're like, well, they say you're supposed to take this for about fucking 10 weeks, but you know, I feel good. I'm gonna continue to take it. I'm gonna continue to take it. And then 5 months later, you're still on it. You're evil. Basically. Yeah. So, and doing all this shit kind of made me think, you know, are these serial killers, maybe there's something wrong with their endocrine systems? Are they making certain kinds of things that are like testosterone?
I mean, it's possible.
But not quite. Because Tren is a 19 Nor testosterone its mother compound is 19 Nor testosterone, which is like normal testosterone. It's just that one of the carbon atoms is moved to another position in there. It's real close to testosterone chemically, but not in its effects. So it makes you wonder if some of these fucking weird ass serial killers are mutants and they're just making another kind of testosterone.
Well, they gotta have something wrong with that.
There's kind of make something wrong with them.
Because I've told you before, it's like, and I'm not saying, because I know that there have been some people that had like relatively quote unquote normal upbringings and stuff like that, and they did turn out to be serial killers. And then you have people that might have been normal otherwise, but then they endured like horrific abuse, and that turned them into serial killers. But I kind of feel like serial killers would be a lot more common if there wasn't some kind of biological element that had to be crossbred with environmental elements.
Yeah.
It has to be like a perfect storm of shit happening.
That's what I think it is.
Because otherwise it would be a lot more common.
Because there's a lot of guys that go through that shit. Why aren't they serial killers? Man, fucking.
That's what I'm saying.
Grab those serial killers and I do a blood test on them and look at their testosterone. Not only the qualities of it, but I'd look at that shit under an electron microscope. Is their version of testosterone closer to Tren? It might be. Tren will make you evil.
Yeah, you said all
feels
kind
great.
of crazy shit.
Oh yeah, it feels great. But
and like I said, and that was the frustrating thing about it, is that you thought you were fine.
Yeah.
But you were like saying just insane stuff.
Yeah.
But like you couldn't like tell. I couldn't tell you that you were saying insane stuff because you wouldn't believe me.
No, because it seemed normal at the time.
Right, but it absolutely was not.
If you look at a trend, look at trend chemically, and then you look at fucking testosterone side by side, they look almost exactly the same. But the effects are very different. I've taken all the esters of fucking testosterone. I've taken most of the different kinds of fucking steroids that are based on testosterone, DHT derivatives, testosterone derivatives, fucking 19 Nor testosterone derivatives. I've taken most of all the major ones. There's nothing like Tren. Trenbolone is fucking wicked.
Victor said, I want to do Tren and fuck twinks.
Yeah. It'll make you a homosexual rapist.
I mean, as long as other people aren't around you. Because like I said, it's very, very fun for the person taking it, I'm sure, but not so fun for everyone else.
And you don't, I didn't exhibit any violence towards women, you know what I mean? You're real simpy towards women. Fucking simpy and protective. But you just wanted to kill men. Especially weak men. Weak men you wanted to attack and kill them. Like they didn't have a right to exist. It's some bizarre shit, man. Bizarre shit.
Well, and you were also having like really, really bad like what should I call it? Delusions of grandeur?
Yeah, you think you're a god.
Yeah, and I think you said exactly that.
Yeah.
At some point, I'm looking at you like
being.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah, you were kind of, and I'm just like, are you kidding or?
No, you're not.
You weren't kidding, and I was like,
well, you saw me fight 2 or 3.
I'm in trouble.
I would go to the nightclub. And if dudes fucking violated,
Thank you, Victor.
We went to the nightclub and fucking dudes grabbed her ass. I fucking jumped on that dude, fucking grabbed him by the fucking throat. You'll fight 4 or 5 guys, and these are 6-footers. I'm fucking 5'6", and I'll jump on 3 or 4 or 5 6-foot guys and try to fight them and drive them off. Yeah. And Daniel was like, oh yeah, I was telling Daniel about it. He goes, oh yeah, you can beat anybody's ass when you're on that when you're your size. And then he's like, you should come out to the club with me. We'll get jacked on Tren and we'll fight the whole club. And then we'll fight the cops when they show up. And I'm like,
and then you'll get shot.
And I'm like, yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good.
That's what I mean. Like stupid shit like that sounds good to you.
I'm like,
wait,
oh, hold on. What?
And then you'll get shot. Leaving me alone, leaving Pookie and Dakota as orphans.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of a bloodlust type thing. But and then
look, here's
coming
the
off
thing.
that shit, it took me about a month or so to get back to normal.
Yeah. Here's the thing. It's like I don't know. Like I wouldn't presume to speak for anybody else because I know I'm like a weirdo and everything. But it's just kind of like, look, I'm not denying that I'm not out sometimes and don't want to pull someone's head off. I do.
Yeah.
I think everybody feels like that. Like, especially if you're in a certain kind of mood and, like, people are just being a certain kind of way, and you're just like, man, if I could kill this fucker right now and get away with it, I absolutely would.
Yeah.
And, like, I've thought about it lots of times. But it's like, and I think most people are like that. I don't know if that's me projecting, but it's like, I kind of feel like most people are
Now, most
like
people
that.
have anger.
Yeah.
It's
I mean,
anger.
I do too. I get it.
Yeah.
But I just kind of feel like, I mean, I'd have to be really, really drunk before I would even consider, because I understand that there are consequences.
Yeah.
And I'm just kind of like, I don't want to ruin my whole fucking life.
Yeah.
Just because this one person is doing something really annoying right now. You know what I mean? It's like, I'd like to kill them. If I could get away with it, maybe I would. But I know I'm not going to be.
When they're talking about werewolf stories, embracing the animal side of yourself, the things like fucking animal passions and bloodlust and things, that's trend. You take trend, I mean, you go, yeah, that's
it's very much
for most people.
That's what I
trend,
that's what I meant when I said that I feel like there's less explanation necessary for werewolf myths, because everybody can understand, because we are animals as well, so we still have a lot of those. I don't know if I'd necessarily even call them atavistic, because they're still present. So, but you still have a lot of those animalistic urges. Yeah. Everybody has those to greater or lesser degrees. So it's like, so I understand that people have fantasies about just, you know, throwing off the constrictions of society or whatever. I mean, that was the same thing that Jekyll and Hyde. Well, I mean, Jekyll and Hyde is essentially a werewolf story, is what that is. Yeah. Because it's somebody that's like, oh, he's sick of all this uptight Victorian society bullshit, and he just wants to go around and like club people with his cane and shit like that.
Now, I think Jekyll and Hyde originally was about cocaine.
That too.
I think originally. But there are newer versions of Jekyll and Hyde that came out like 80s and 90s, when he was dealing with a powerful pheromone. And a pheromone is like a hormone, and hormones are testosterone. Steroids. Steroids are modified hormones. And once again, they're talking about Trent. Trent will turn you into fucking Mr. Hyde.
Yeah.
The same with the Goblin. All these little fucking stories that DC and the Marvel, there was always inspired by something that really existed.
Well, you got to get ideas. You know, I'm a writer too. You get ideas from somewhere, and you usually get ideas from real shit.
Yeah, the Goblin.
I mean, I always did.
The Goblin and Mr. Hyde was based upon the effects of fucking roid rage, basically. That's kind of what they're talking about. Even though Trend is not rage, you never really get like a rage per se. It's just this seething fucking animalistic fucking urges. You know what I mean? And
you kind of
you're in the animal kingdom.
You kind of seemed like, what's that animal that's pissed off all the time? A Wolverine.
Badger. A Wolverine. Yeah, right, like a Wolverine.
You were just like low key pissed off all the time, like you're just like you were always like that.
Yeah, and then
which, like I said, I get it because I'm kind of like that too. But I'm like that naturally. I don't even need anything.
And then like somebody does something, and you and it's instant. You don't think about it. You just do it instantly. Trent is in charge, not really you. See,
honestly, it's good that I don't take that or that I don't have that, because I feel like that quite a bit too. Yeah. But I also have like the other side of me that's just kind of like, don't ruin your whole life, Jenny. It's like, you could kill this person. I know you want to, but it's like, you better not.
Well, I ate a couple of really big trim bologna sandwiches, and I've had enough. I understand what it does. I don't want to go back down that path. There's so many other compounds that are, like I said, you go back on that,
I'm moving to a hotel for a few months.
There's so many other ones that are that can do just as much for you, and they don't have those weird side effects. And it was originally made for humans. But then after they saw what that kind of did to you, they said, no, that's like, no, livestock that's only.
Not really safe for human
consumption. They give it to cows and cattle.
Well, and some people that have taken it have legit, like, murdered people.
Yeah, that guy that fucking attacked that cop with a hatchet just for no reason, and he got shot up. Trent. The dude who thought that those people living in that house had abducted a girl, and he killed the wife and the mama. and asked where.
See,
the girl
that's what
was.
I mean, and it's like you never know. Like shit, man.
There was a girl in there.
You could have gone and killed our fucking neighbors.
Nah, I don't know. That dude must have been on a much more of the shit, or had a certain weakness to it. I mean, I knew I was fucking up, but.
I mean, to be honest, and like, I mean this with all love and respect, but you're kind of a dick before. So it's like, then on all of that stuff, it's like, it was like amplified like 1,000 times.
Yeah.
And I was like, holy crap, you really do not need that.
Yeah.
John says, Jenny, I would recommend...
Some came in here and said I was terrifying.
And that was after you'd already been off of it for a little while.
A couple weeks.
And I was like, yeah, and I told her later on...
I've been off of it for a week.
Yeah, and I was just like
2 months.
And I was like, oh, you should have been here a little while back.
Yeah.
You'd have been even more scared. You've been hiding under the fucking table.
Yeah.
Like I was. I was just like in here.
Yeah, but I wasn't violent towards...
No, but
I knew. It's just
but the thing about it was that you were acting so erratically that there was no way that we could know
what I was going to do next.
What you were going to do next. That's what I mean. That's what's scary about it is that you don't... Like, yeah, you can say that now, but it's like at the time I had no... Like, you were acting so crazy that I was just kind of like, well, shit, anything could happen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it was like that.
Right. Internally, I was very sentimental and simpy and
but I didn't get any of that though. None of that was coming out externally, really.
Yeah, internally I was real simpy and sentimental and overprotective and trying to protect women and that I cared about. So you're very much like, and to do this you have to attack men, which is that's and then like
not saying I wouldn't like to attack men too. I do.
Then
but
like
I'm
weak
just saying.
men are more disgusting, so you want to attack them first, and then strong men are a threat, so we have to attack that. You're very much like something out of the animal kingdom. You're not thinking about it. It's just you're just doing it.
I just want to attack assholes, whether they're men or women.
Everybody I did attack was an asshole. Jenny can testify.
I will give you that. Like you didn't really like it. Not that I know of.
No.
I mean, you might have gone out when I was not here and done some shit that I don't know about.
No, I wasn't.
But
you had to be bad. If you were bad, I was going to attack you.
And like so like in some ways I didn't feel too bad because I'm like they're being a dick, they probably have you know what I mean, because some people, I mean, I'm not a big advocate of violence, but some people really do need to be punched in the mouth. But I mean, I don't know if they'll learn anything, but
I will say that I loved it. It felt great, and I kind of miss it, but I know that that's not the right way to be.
You put that seriously, you take that shit again, I'm gonna like strap you to the bed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like they used to do in the old timey like insane asylums.
Yeah.
I'm gonna strap you down.
For you gym bros who know what I'm talking about with the trim bologna sandwiches, don't fuck with trim. Just take test and NPP. NPP is real close. Or DECA. DECA's good. I'm on DECA right now. Test and DECA.
Am I on that now?
You're on DECA.
I am also on DECA.
Very small amount. Decadurabolin. It's very close to trend.
I don't feel any different.
It doesn't have any of those weird mental side effects.
I never feel any different.
Yeah.
I always feel pretty much the same.
Yeah.
Well, that goes back to what you were saying earlier, where I must be one of those
you don't respond
weak responders.
You're kind of a weak responder. Yeah.
Well, like I said, I'll take it. I'm not. Yeah. I know you say that like it's a bad thing.
But you do respond. You have your shape.
I do, but not the way that other people do.
Your shape has changed for the better.
But like I said, it's not like dramatic.
No.
But
you've been on it for months now.
I have that with everything, whether it's illness or medicine or anything like that. Like everything is just kind of like meh. I'm just kind of very.
Jen did about a month and a half on NPP. Now she's on DECA, which are very similar. Very similar.
Yeah, and like I said, he always asks me like because he tries to like monitor, and he's just like, "Will you feel any different?" I'm like, "Nope."
Yeah.
I never feel any different.
And she's doing like between 50 and 100 a week. It's a long Esther in D'Angelo, 19 North testosterone.
I always feel pretty much the same.
She feels the same, yeah. And for postmenopausal women, that's what they want to be on because it prevents osteoporosis and keeps their figures looking good.
Yeah, I mean, that's good. Like, I have noticed a difference, but it's not, like, super dramatic.
No.
You know what I mean?
No.
And I don't feel any different.
The thing about tread is that tread really didn't make that much. It was more about shape. I didn't gain a lot of size, but I did get a better shape. But I don't think it was worth the mental side effects. And I think
it definitely wasn't.
NPP did about the same thing.
Yeah, honestly, I didn't really see that it made that much more of a difference that it would
You're right.
be worth it.
Trend, NPP,
because it made you act like a crazy person.
Yeah,
and it's
Trend, NPP, and fucking Decadurabolin, they're all the same 19 nortestosterone types, just different esters of them. You want to go with NPP for if you want a short ester, which is fast acting, or you want to go Deca for like a longer acting steroid that's in the background, just kind of working slowly. You know, real good for HRT or hormone replacement therapy. You mix it up with the right proportions of testosterone and inject it, and it's good, especially if you're over 40. They're not good on young people, you know, but they're real good on older people. Yeah, all of them. Steroids and young people don't really mix because young people have well-functioning endocrine systems. You have enough hormones there where you can do well. But when you get older, those hormones shut down, so you got to replace them with something.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't really advise getting into that shit until you get older.
Yeah, late 30s.
Because when you're young, you don't need it.
You don't need as much.
You don't need it.
No. You can start getting about 35, 37. That's when you start thinking about replacement. Yeah.
John said, Jenny, I would recommend you listen to Night of the Wolf. It's an old-fashioned radio drama with Vincent Price. And it's about Vincent Price going to find his son, who is turned into a werewolf. And he said it's on YouTube. It's great. I will actually definitely listen to that. Maybe I can listen to it in my car in the morning.
Yeah.
Now that I'm thinking about it, if it's on YouTube. I'll just put it on my car stereo.
Jeff Yar gave us another $2. Thank you very much.
Aw, thank you. Ben says, all things in moderation. Yeah.
No, not all things. I wouldn't even do tread in moderation.
Yeah, some things you should probably just not do any of.
No.
But, you know, I'm not going to do any flocka or crack
flocka in moderation.
or anything like that. But you know what I mean? But, like, most things
Yeah.
in moderation. Let's put it that way. Alcohol in moderation-ish, because we do like to drink a lot.
Yeah.
Some other drugs in moderation. Fattening foods in moderation. But, you know, some things probably no. And then Ben said, I'm not a violent person, but...
Yeah.
Well... I mean, there's some situations where, like I said...
That's the only way out of the situation is violence, yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm not going to lie. And usually, like, the drunker I get, like, sometimes I'm like, man, that person really needs to be, like, fucking kicked in the taint right now.
Yeah.
But, like I said, I don't know if they would learn anything, so I don't know how effective it would be. But what are you going to do? What are you going to do? All right, so I really have to go to bed.
Yeah, shut it. You got to go to work in the morning.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I have to get up at 5 in the morning. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed the show. You know, we kind of mostly talked about vampires, but we talked about werewolves and shit too. We mostly stayed on topic, right? I feel like.
Yeah, no. I think it's okay show. We got paid for it.
Yeah, okay.
We got paid.
That's always good.
Yeah.
So we'll be back on Friday night for the Sidetrack show. And I don't think we're going anywhere this Friday, so we can just feel free to sit here and drink and talk to our heart's content.
Yeah.
You better not be. You'll be better by then. That's 2 days away. But yeah, so hopefully you guys can join us for that. So remember to like and comment and all that other kind of stuff. And we will see you guys again on Friday night. Good night.